Oh, yeah, you hear the sound. You know we must be heading back to the M. My name is Jim Cross, and this is the In Off the Bench podcast. I am joined, as always, by my co host, my partner in crime, my brother from another mother, Daniel Ball. And tonight, we are going to get the story of Jeffrey Wright from ESPN Memphis. We're also going to talk all things Memphis sports. The Tigers taking out UConn, taking out Michigan State. The Grizzlies, John Morant is back. We also got to talk Tigers football, big game coming up with Tulane. But first, we must plug the sponsors. Chinook Ceadery, 8 flavors, mild to wild, the best in the game, less salt, no sandpaper tongue. Old Dominic Distillery, in the heart of downtown Memphis. Vodka, whiskey, bourbon, gin, they got it all. Tell them Jim and DB sent you. It's the holiday season. Take care of your favorite family and friends. They won't be disappointed. Memphis City Design. Go get your official In Off the Bench merch. Get your Grizzlies merch. Go get your Tigers merch. They got it all. Whatever colors you're looking for, while supplies last. And last but not least, go see our man, Dr. Vic, at Relief Chiropractic. You won't be disappointed. He's been changing my life. I feel like I'm 20 again. But let's get into the biggest interview in podcasting this week with our man, Jeffrey Wright from 92.9 ESPN Memphis. Fellas, Jeffrey, how we doing tonight?
Gentlemen, I'm great. How are we doing?
Can't complain. It's a great day. It's been a fantastic day of sports yesterday and today, so I'm on a high.
Yeah, there's no question. It sometimes, to me, the thing that helps us the most, at least at 92.9, is the Grizzlies being good. Like, it's the most direct indicator of whether or not, like when you talk about your numbers go up, it's usually directly related to the win-loss record of the Grizzlies. But, man, if you can get both of them winning at the same time, and particularly winning like this where you knock off UConn and then you knock off Michigan State, it's not like, okay, you're trying to talk yourself into winning at Texas A&M is, a good solid win, but you're not having to talk yourself into beating UConn and beating Michigan State. Like, everybody can just sit there and see that and go, yeah, I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get into that, we got to get your story. And before we do that, we got to break the ice. And these are some topics, getting to listen to you on the radio every day. I've got a pretty good, indicator of some things about you, but there are some things I don't. And one of them, we got Thanksgiving coming up, and a hot topic is Thanksgiving side dishes. What is your favorite, Jeffrey?
So I guess the first question is, how do you determine what dressing is?
What it's made out of. If it's made out of cornbread, it's dressing.
Okay. No. So I have opinions on that. So obviously I'm a Southerner, like a 5th generation Southerner, 4th generation Southerner. So obviously it's gonna be cornbread dressing. But the question is, what do you categorize it as? Is it gonna be a side? Is it part of the entree? Like, because technically I think turkey is one thing, but turkey and dressing is, like, you can talk me into. It's kind of like
dressing is a side. I do.
Because if we're considering it a side, then I think it has to be number one. Like, I don't. But if we're saying dressing is part of the entree, then I'm probably going the mashed potatoes number one.
Mashed potatoes has been the most popular answer. A lot of people, me and Daniel like some green bean casserole, and you'd be amazed how many of these college kids have never had it. It mind blowing.
So the question is, in y'all's green bean casserole, like, my wife, like, I can't stand the cream of mushroom type dishes that are like made in a crock pot. That's like, you get the Campbell's cream of mushroom, just dump it in there. I can't stand that. I also have like a thing with mushrooms. Like, I don't
like mushrooms either. It's not used, and she doesn't use a crock pot. She doesn't.
Like, my mother does gets the whole green beans and basically just puts bacon on top of it, and we call it green bean casserole. Well, that's green beans with bacon. Like, sign me up for that. But the stuff that my wife likes, no, thank you.
No. Mine's got all sorts of stuff, cooks in the oven. My mom makes it same way as my wife. And so, I don't know, it was something that was funny because I thought it was disgusting as a kid, and not because of the taste. It was one of those things that I just looked at and said I didn't like it. And then when I eventually tried it, I was like, okay, I can get down with this. For me, I always got to have it. And then, like you said, the stuffing, and then if you have mac and cheese or mashed potatoes, you just roll from there. Daniel, let me ask you, there's a lot of carbs on Thanksgiving. Do you actually put everything on your plate being as healthy as you are?
Yeah, so Thanksgiving is the one day where I feel like I can be out of my element and I know everyone knows what what they're gonna see when they see my plate. And it's probably gonna be multiple plates. But yeah, I'm very compartmentalized with my plates. Every dish, every side dish, every main dish has its spot on my plate. So yes, I go crazy.
We actually I mentioned this on today's show. I don't think that Marcus Smart got enough credit for coming down with food poisoning the week before Thanksgiving. Like that is an absolute veteran move. Like, hey, everybody was already starting to notice Marcus, you're looking kind of heavy. Like it's a good move. Get everybody off your back. Just get food poisoning, drop like a quick 15, and then doing it the week before Thanksgiving. Like now he's guilt free. Like he can go into this week and just absolutely crush it.
Yeah.
Nice.
You
Well, his last day
you
is
related it
Saturday.
to like what was it? You were telling a story about
Oh
your
yeah,
homecoming dance or something?
yeah, like it's I had a buddy in college that lived with me, and I got swine flu my junior year, and he had beefed up a little bit before formal season, and he yelled at me to come spit in his mouth when he heard that I had swine flu because Daddy needed to lose a quick 15 right before formal season started.
You know, you were the only person that I know that got swine flu.
It was
It's just
I
like
am
the
I don't
rarest.
now granted I was in LA. Like it was in college, so
Yeah.
Pepperdine, and like it seemed to me that it hit the West Coast much harder than it hit the rest of America. I kid you not. It was awful. Like it was 5 times worse than COVID. And like I know a lot of that is what type of case do you get of every, like I understand like all that. This isn't even a political statement. I'm telling you my experience with it. It was absolutely brutal.
I thought it was a myth until he told me.
Jim, Jeffrey said he thought his mom told his dad that he thought he was gonna die.
Yeah, no, my mom basically is like, I think I have to go to California. And my dad's like, what? She's like, yeah, I think Jeffrey might die. And she's like, I guess I gotta go like get him. And like, I mean, it was a full 4 days of in bed. Your head felt like it was just getting hit with an Easton, like constantly in the back of the head. And then you just have these massive like body temperature swings. You go from like 104 to like 97, and you don't realize when your body hits 97 that like you think you're dying of hypothermia. And it was the most miserable experience I've ever had. Whereas like COVID, like you didn't feel great, but like I don't know, I've had cases like of the regular flu that were just as bad as like I like in terms of like it's tough to feel when you get that real case of the flu and you got the aches, the chills, it's tough to feel a whole lot worse than that.
To me, it's the one that comes through. Dan, you remember last year, I had friends come in town to go to the LSU Mississippi State game and everything, stay with me. I got one of those 24-hour flus. To me, those are the worst ones, and it's obviously short-lived.
It's like so intense, and it's like it's like you're basically getting like mega flu, but it's like it's gonna burn bright. It's an AC/DC song. It's gonna rock really hard, but it's gonna be done in 4 minutes.
But it's bad when I got to send them on. They come stay. I got to send them on to the football game without me. Just take the tickets, give them to whoever. Meet some people at the tailgate. I mean, literally, they're going to Starkville with no direction because now I'm not going, and it's like I couldn't get out of bed.
Well, those are the worst.
The worst, Jeffrey, is, and you'll see this at some point, I'm sure, when your kid gets something and you're going to get it, and it's that in-between time where you're just waiting for it to happen. That is the absolute worst.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we have the dynamic now in my family where we figured out, I have no idea why it works this way, but we're now like on 4 or 5 different cases of it being the same thing. My daughter gets it. Then about 2 days later, my wife gets it. And then she looks at me and she's like, 2 days later, you're going to get it. And you're right. That 48 hours of just waiting and waiting, it is absolute hell. Because it, like I don't even try to like talk myself into, oh, maybe my immune system's just stronger and I can beat this. Like I won't get it. She's going to get it. She's the weak one. No, I just know, like I accept that it's headed my way.
Yeah, we were having this talk. It's the child care facilities. Nobody keeps their snotty-nosed kids at home when they're sick. Your kid's going to get it and they're going to bring it home to you. And then it's like wildfire. That's why, you're talking about COVID. When everybody started wearing masks and washing their hands, notice nobody was getting sick. And that really started at the schools. But we could probably do a whole nother show on that.
I think we're just, even when you mention the word COVID, everyone gets PTSD. It's like everyone's just like, and it's like I've now noticed you have to do the thing, even if you want to talk about it, but you don't want to do the move that because we all lived it. And anytime you're in like 2021, 2020, 2022, and people wanted to talk to you about COVID, you're just like, I don't need to hear what, because you're coming from a position. Now it's like, if you want to go back and talk about the experience, you almost have to do the apology. No, I don't want to talk about it like that. Like, I'm not like, we just talk about our shared experience.
I judge people when I go to the Grizzlies games and they're wearing masks. I can't help myself. I'm like, come on, man, it's 2024. Lose it.
Yeah, when you go to the grocery store and you see the people, it's like, I guess stay strong. Like, I don't know. Like,
but let's actually segue to the next. Man, Daniel, we just still on the icebreaker topic number 1. But Jeffrey, if you could go see any musician, any group in concert, who would you go see?
Okay, so my favorite band of all time is still Blink-182, but I've obviously seen them now, I don't know, at least probably 10 times, one way or the other. So I guess if the question is, does it have to be can it be like a band of the past that's like not touring anymore? Because I think if that's the question, I almost think you have to say the Beatles, just because it's like you want to, like, I think so often in cultures, like when you have multiple generations that have passed it down and been like, this stuff rocks, like you had to experience it. And I think they're such a phenomenon, you almost like want to see it. I think if you can do the bands from the past, super boringly, I'm going to say, I think it has to be the Beatles.
No doubt.
I mean, I think would be a popular answer if you surveyed a lot of people and that was like the option. I think a lot of people would say that just for, nostalgia and historical purposes. And if you're a music person, like that's probably got to be somebody up there that you've got to witness once.
I guess maybe another way you could answer it is like bands that they have like peak value, but they didn't have a lot of staying power. Because I guess like, the answer you can like, I want to go see Nirvana. Like, because
that would probably be top of the list for me. But Jeffrey, 9 out of it doesn't even matter what part of the country. We could be talking about California. We could be talking about New York. Me and Daniel, like, we're not big country people at all. And 9 out of every 10 of these guests say country, and 9 out of every 10 of those say Morgan Wallen. And it's like, oh God,
he fascinates me though.
He's doing something right, because everybody that comes on this show, guy or girl, 24, 18, doesn't matter. They love him.
He drinks heavily. That's what he's doing.
Well, what fascinates me about him is, number one, if you gave me, just like y'all, if you gave me 24 hours and said my life depends on naming a Morgan Wallen song and I can't look it up, like you are taking away the internet from me, I would just say, you're going to have to kill me. Like, just do it now. Like, let's not waste the time. Let's get it over with. But what fascinates me about him is, in an era where we got rid of a lot of people for doing a lot less, like, this guy's actually done some pretty crappy things, and he's truly Teflon. Like, if anything, it makes him stronger.
Me and Daniel talked about it. I was leaving Ole Miss because LSU and Ole Miss baseball had finished their weekend series the same night that concert was, and I saw all the people outside that were waiting to go in, and me and Daniel talked about it. And the crazy part was, when he came back around to the area, he had no problem selling it out again. And it's like, dude, I would never go to a concert again of his after that. There's no way.
Yeah,
Daniel, was it Tampa that he showed? Was it Tampa he did it again?
Well, it was weather related this time. So, but
this was not the first time he had to cancel a concert because he was shit faced.
Right. That's his MO, man. Like, he is like, and even like this rain out concert in Tampa, he sold out one night, rained out the next, and it was like, are you sure it's because of the rain? Like, are you sure?
Yeah.
But with that, how many concerts have you seen where the artist kills it in a rain concert and fans are willing to stand in the rain?
Taylor Swift was here and it was pouring down rain, and she was out there.
You know who kicked ass back in 2005 in the driving rain of Beale Street Music Fest?
I went and saw
My Chemical Romance was awesome.
I saw Foo Fighters. Dave Grohl came out and played acoustic at Music Fest one year, and it was tornado siren.
If you're not willing to stand in the rain, you're not going to go to Music Fest anyway.
Yeah. And especially if you're a teenager. Like, I mean, what are you even doing? like I understand, like when you're in our age, we can do the I can watch it on YouTube, like like there's a lot of other formats I can maybe watch this and not have to have the shared experience. But I don't know, man. He's one of those guys that I've never really identified much that I like about him, but I do acknowledge like I'm not what I kind of went through the same thing with the Taylor Swift experience, because you have to remember, like, I'm basically her age. And so all the girls my age grew up with her. And like, I watched this progression of her going from, Teardrops on My Guitar, like the kind of country poppy stuff, to then she starts with Fearless and starts going into more poppy stuff. But there was still kind of a cross, like she was in that cross section of not quite fully pop, not quite. Then we watch her go full pop. And then the thing that was interesting to me is I felt like her career was starting to do this, because I used to always joke, like, she was always the small doses person for me. Like, a little Taylor Swift went a long way. And I'm not just talking about the music. I'm talking about her. Like, the songs are the songs, but like a little of her goes a really long way. But then her career starts dipping. And then it was almost like as soon as we decided we're coming out of the pandemic, it was like I woke up and all of a sudden she's not a massive star. She's literally the biggest star on the planet. And I'm like, when did this happen? Because like the last I checked when we were doing this, it was like, she was kind of starting to do this. And I was like, I guess that's kind of what happened.
The craziest part was we had people actually telling us, and we talked about it on this show in real time, like she was putting Travis Kelce on the map. And we're like, what are you talking about? If anything, I feel like he's kind of went a little under the radar now that he's with her, because she's getting airtime in the games, and then he's not playing as well.
Well, I feel like too with her, and this could be just perception, but I feel like she was one of the first people. She may not have been the first, but one of the first people to do multiple night stadium shows where she's selling out a Friday.
The only ones I really
Saturday.
remember before that was like U2, but it's been like 10 years. Like, remember when U2 would just go around the country and play football stadiums? But that was such a different time in concerts. Like, nobody's doing what she's doing. In fact, it's quite the opposite of kind of what we were talking about. Sometimes it's not canceling shows for the sniffles. Sometimes it's literally these people thought like, oh, we're seeing all these concerts. Like, concerts are back. Like Jennifer Lopez was trying to book like a massive multi-city tour, and literally nobody had any interest in it.
I just couldn't imagine putting, like, I know this isn't music, but I was listening to Matt Rife the other night, and I went and saw him at the Orpheum in Memphis. He was fantastic. But he said how many shows he had done in the past year, and he said like 387 shows. And I was like, there's 365 days. Like, I started calculating. I was like, that is crazy. He did more than one show a day on average. And I was like, how do you not get burnt out? Like, whether music, comedy, or anything else, it just feels like, man, that would get tiring.
At least
them paychecks look good, I bet.
I was gonna say, like, I think that does become like a, we've probably all had a job. Like, for me in college, it was umpiring. Like, there's a job that pays you just enough money that sucks, but you literally get the paycheck and you're like, oh, it's like kind of a good life lesson of like learning that there is a price for everything. But like, we've all had a job that you don't really like, but it pays you well enough that you just keep doing it and doing it. I also think with Matt Rife, it helps that he's probably on the younger side. Like, it's not like he's got stuff to go home to. Like,
right.
And so, and you're also at that age, you can just get up and do it a lot easier. Like, nothing hurts as much. But I mean, I'm with you. When you start doing the math and you're like, because you also factor, it's like, how many did you say, 380 dates? Or was it 380 dates? And you got to also realize, like, I would imagine 70% of his shows are on Fridays or Saturdays.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, that's like 380 dates of probably like 3 shows on a Friday, 3 on a Saturday, maybe 2 on a Sunday, and then like heading somewhere else. Like, that's when you.
I mean, the one I went and saw in Memphis was the second on a Saturday night. He started at 10. Anyway, you never know. He just put on a show. I mean, that's why I got to give him his props. Like, I mean, he came out and killed it. And so these artists, the ones that are showing up, not knowing showing, but doing 2, 3, I mean, you got to give them tip of the cap because it's fantastic.
Well, it's where I can see like the Taylor Swift angle both ways. Like, number one, to the Swifties out there, like, she's not a poet. All she does is write about things that happen to her. Like, she's a well-selling narcissist, which is phenomenal. By the way, she has bangers too. Like, there are songs that I will go to the grave and defend. Like style, about half of the Fearless, like I will go to the grave. But it's like at the same time, I can acknowledge all of that. And then when I sit there and watch her for 3 hours, just her on stage, like physical, everything. Like I don't care if she's like not singing every note. Like just like standing on your feet and doing that for 3 hours at 36 just tires me. And so like I can't acknowledge like there's things about her that are like super impressive, but it's like she can still be a little annoying.
Hey, which reminds me, Jeffrey, I told Daniel about it. The Roscoe Dash halftime performance at the Grizzlies Nuggets was so terrible. I was actually looking forward to it because he had 3 or 4 catchy songs. Anyway, he wasn't singing half the words, which so you could hear the actual song being sung behind him. And then when he did start singing, a lot of time I was like, please stop. Like, I was like, man, this is going down as one of the worst performances I've seen anywhere music wise. I was really disappointed because when they announced them and the music dropped, I was like, here we go. And then I was like, oof. And then it hit me. I told Daniel, I realized how long ago those songs were. And I was like, damn, time passes. Those songs were like 15 years old.
No, you bring up a good point. Like when everybody says don't meet your heroes, nah, like that's neither here nor there.
That's basically every time I go watch Russell Westbrook because I watch him as look. It's one thing because I know he wouldn't say nothing to me if I tried, but my son's a fan and all the other kids, man, he don't never talk to any of them, and my son will come and be like, he wouldn't sign or he didn't look at me or whatever, and that's like to your point. It's like every time I watch, it's like golly, man, like he seems like an asshole.
Yeah, no, it's like also like in the situation that you're talking about, not with your boys, but like with Roscoe, it's like no, it's like don't meet your heroes. It's mainly don't go see your heroes perform when they're down and out. Like when it's over, like
there's a reason why he's doing halftime
at
Sunday night Grizzlies game.
Like I used to say in college, like, ooh, Eddie Money, like my dad, like take me home tonight. I was like, oh man, that guy's got some bangers, like. And then you realize like he's doing the Indian casino circuit in like LA in 2007. You're like, that's probably not the best spot to go see Eddie Money. That's probably the I got divorced one too many times. It's the same thing. Like there's a joke on my Twitter profile. Like there's the Goo Goo Dolls are better than Pearl Jam. Johnny Resnick has not stopped touring, and it's because Johnny got divorced at a really bad time to get divorced, where he got married with no money and he got divorced with all the money. So Johnny's going to be hitting the road for the rest.
What's funny is I know exactly what you're talking about. When I was stationed in San Diego, I worked concert security, and sometimes it was big venues, sometimes it was small venues, but exactly what you're talking about, the Viejas Casino, like all those.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I tell you, the biggest brawl I got into, you can't even make this story up, Jeffrey, B-52s, old as hell. The crowd's old, like no reason.
Shack, baby.
And that actually doesn't surprise me because like their whole mantra is being a party group. Like, so everything has to have alcohol with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so this woman, I'm on stage front. She keeps climbing up on the stage and I keep helping her down. And then she waits till I'm not looking and she runs up there and she gets on there. And so I grab her by her belt and sling her off the stage. Well, she leaves and she comes back and she's dating like a 400-pound Samoan dude who's coming my way angry. Man, I'm literally calling for help ASAP. He took me through 5 rows, Jeffrey. It took 5 of us to get him out of there.
Yeah.
It's like a B-52s concert. What is going on?
It's like that is kind of, if we want to bring it back to sports, I made the joke last week. If y'all watch Thursday Night Football, I thought one of the scariest plays of the night was the 4th down where Russell's kind of scrambling out to his left, and the camera angle had it perfectly from up top. And Myles Garrett is chasing after him. And you just see how big, strong, and fast Myles Garrett is. And he's like bearing down on Wilson. You know he's going to kill him. I feel like that's like the closest thing you could feel like how Russell Wilson felt to that moment. Watching the 400-pound Samoan, you go, then you just know immediately like,
yeah, that's why I'm calling for backup. Like, I'm not ready for this at all.
I got to have my affairs in order, everything.
But the last icebreaker, man, Daniel, we are taking the whole show
off the rails, man.
We got a guy's got a radio show. He's got a voice. I'll tell you what, I'll be honest.
I can talk for a while.
The longest show to date still maybe Hasseltine, so it ain't nothing new when it comes to Memphis radio. But this is the one I'll judge you on. What is your favorite baseball movie all time?
Ooh, okay. So if the question is favorite versus what do I think the best is?
No, I want your favorite. You can tell me best ever. I need to know your favorite.
I think it's still got to be The Sandlot.
Yes.
I mean, I saw it like I remember exactly where I was the first time I watched it. My aunt and uncle had a condo down in Florida, and they were the first people we knew that had HBO. And it was like right after the theater run, and I wasn't probably old enough to go see it in theaters, and so like it came on HBO. It's like a rainy Florida afternoon, and my dad and I were watching. We're like, "What is this? Like, this is the greatest thing we've ever seen." And like we immediately went home, like bought the VHS. I wore out the VHS. I think it's got to be that. I used to think, I don't know where time age wise, but like Little Big League in real time, I was like, man, I think I like that better than Rookie of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
But I was watching MLB Network a couple of years ago, and Little Big League came on, and I'm like, ooh, I haven't watched this in a while. Like, I'll sit down. Does not hold up. I don't know. The kid is bad.
We
like,
actually
Bill
had
Hayward,
a conversation. Bad. Who would be? Me and Daniel went through this. We asked numerous baseball guests. Aaron Judge ended up being the most common answer. But who would be the King Griffey Jr. if you did it now? Because the thing was, King Griffey Jr. wasn't villainized by anybody. Everybody loved him, but in that movie, he was made to be the villain. So, like, who would you do that modern day? And most said Aaron Judge just because he's a larger-than-life figure that plays for the Yankees.
Yeah. The problem, though, is I don't think Judge is unanimously thought of as cool, though, correct? Because it wasn't just that Griffey was like the unquestioned best player of his generation. It was that he was also like remarkably cool. Mm-hmm. Like he was like
backwards hat,
everything.
BP, like
it's the prettiest.
Yeah. I mean, in that movie, he robs the home run, and you're not even mad. I
do think that's why, like, as a kid, I used to think Little Big League was better, is because, well, they got the real baseball players, and like, even though I wasn't like super old enough, but it's like I could still recognize guys that could throw and guys that could. Like, you can see the difference between real. Like, even they got guys like Jonathan Silverman that even like at least played high school baseball. Like they got guys.
I like movies that have because I remember it wasn't even that great a movie, but I liked the movie Eddie. To your point, because had real NBA players.
Correct, and so I think that was why, because I just remember going back and watching it. I'm like, oh man, and maybe in fairness to the movie, it's the movie. Like, I also liked how they didn't win. Like, you know, like guys, like, and you see, like that was kind of like a cool thing. It's like, all right, like. More of us are going to play a baseball game that ends our season and loses than are going to win it all.
Well, something me and Daniel have never talked about, because we do love Rookie of the Year. Daniel, you know, he flexes that ring at the end. And if you just think about it, because the kid Rowan Gardner no longer has the arm, and Chet Steadman's already been burned on the mound. How did y'all manage to win this World Series?
I mean, it's like the kids these days, they get a ring for like third place, man.
Listen, I don't even think you have to get third.
Yeah,
like,
participate.
I mean, that's the other thing. It's like you can buy a ring. Like we all got Amazon. Like you can go on and like monogram it. Like just get it made. Like that's kind of the other thing. But yeah, Thomas Ian Nichols. So one of my good buddies who will occasionally from time to time host with me, Justin Moore. He was the front man for Ingram Hill, or still is technically. But there was the other Justin Moore that got famous, even though my Justin was famous like first. So he has to go by JR like for copyright reasons. But so he did one of those cruise like tours with Thomas Ian Nichols. Thomas came and played like growlers like 2 months ago, like as like he's kind of like DJing, playing like pop punk hits from like the late 90s, early 2000s. And like the guy was like super nice, super cool. And he's like, yeah, I just got off a red eye from LA to Dallas to here. And like, yeah, like as soon as like he could come on the show, he did. And it's like, that kind of made me, I was like, okay, I feel pretty good about always kind of liking him. Like, at least like my instincts were right. Like I've always liked him. And so like, it was kind of reassuring because he was the nicest guy, super cool. Like went to lunch. Like he was a great dude.
I mean, you go from Rookie of the Year to American Pie. I mean, that's a pretty good.
Well, and then don't forget, remember he had that, it was like another, like one of those deep cable movies. Like if you were 15, you might see a pair of boobs in it. And so like, it was like the same writer that did American Psycho, but it was it's like in the American Psycho cinematic universe before that was a thing. And he was like you'd see that on HBO all the time. Like, but like there's a lot of life lessons that Thomas has taught me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you go through like his body of work, like he's been on that right timeline for me of like everything. He's been a little bit ahead of me. So it's like, it always kept him cooler. You know, the guy that's like 5 years older than you is always going to be cooler. Like all of our first favorite hero was like the next door neighbor or whatever that was like 4 or 5 years older. And so it's like, he got to live all the really awesome life experiences on camera. And so it's like, yeah, okay, that guy's awesome.
Yeah. Those are the guys that always, you can relate to the most. I mean, the guys that you grow up and you're like, man, that's how I want to live my life. I want to model it after him.
I want to be playing acoustic guitar on a Carnival cruise line in my 40s, like, and then I want to travel the country and playing at a Memphis like dive bar. I want to be spinning some tunes. Like, that's what I want to be doing in my 40s. Like that would be a life well lived and getting paid for it.
Yeah. Oh, that would mean like life is just you're coasting at that point.
Well, yeah, but it also means your name still matters a little bit.
Well,
like, you know what I mean? Like, even it doesn't have to matter a ton, but like, it still matters a little bit.
Jeffrey, the jab that everybody likes to take at me now, me and Daniel laugh about this. So I'm now 40 and I can be found at, a lot of college events, specifically baseball and gymnastics. And I take pictures with the guests we have on the show and they're like, "You're lame. You hang out with college kids on the weekend." And I was like the best athletes in the country. Like, I don't really understand what I'm doing that's so lame. Like, really, and so we just kind of laugh at it. It's like, it feels like pure jealousy. And so it goes with what
I was
you're
going to say,
saying.
that feels like a coping mechanism. That feels like something that people that like don't get to have any fun get to say, like, and it's like you rationalize like that you're like not having any fun by making fun of the person that is having fun. Like that feels like that move.
Absolutely. All right, Jeffrey, we got to get to it, man. It's time to, in your words, tell your story.
There we go.
So, obviously you talked about going to Pepperdine, but you also talked about growing up in the South. So where are you from? What's home? Is it Memphis? Is it somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm born and raised Baptist East.
Let's go.
August 3rd, 1988. I caused my mom like 20 something hours of labor. So because I was the first of my family that didn't know. So then finally, C-section. I cost my dad playing with Peter Jacobson in the Pro-Am. So I got to ruin both my parents' days, like right off the bat.
And that's why you got the swine flu.
Yes,
that's why you got the swine flu,
Listen,
man.
I never said that. It was unfair. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that I had it. Grew up, went to Cordova through 3rd grade, and then at parent-teacher conferences, my mom got asked where you stays, and after that, I was tested for PDS the next day, and so then I went to PDS in 4th through 6th grade, and then like when you've already like moved from like when you move from like 3rd to 4th grade, like that's always kind of an awkward time like to move because you're all kind of figuring out who's good at sports, which is basically going to be the pecking order for like the next decade.
Yeah.
It's like I already had to make new friends going into that, so it's like I didn't really want to have to go to another school again, so we all just went to MUS. Like I think like our grade set like a record for the highest percentage of PDS kids that went to MUS. And so graduated from MUS in 2007. I think we can maybe have this shared experience. Like if you grow up in the South and you don't like country music, I think there's like in the back of your head, there's like, oh, well, like Southern California is there for me. Like I'll like that. And so that's what I ended up doing. I found a school out there at Pepperdine. I had a friend that was out there visiting, and then Pepperdine really recruited MUS hard. And so like, basically like, all right, they went to like our guidance scouts, like who can't get into the Ivy Leagues? Like, all right, who can't get into like Virginia and North Carolina? And like, whoever's like not on that list, like give us the rest. And so like, they recruited a lot of us that were kind of like, that like, not top 25, but like, you were like, you're kind of like, you're like one of those, you're a 7-5 team that like was 2 like overtime wins away from being.
I mean, I remember picking Pepperdine as like a 14 to win in my NCAA brackets at times.
Oh yeah. I mean, I still have when they beat Bobby Knight, I want to say it was like 98, something like that. Like that was the other thing. We used to be Gonzaga because we cared. And then sports got expensive. And then when sports got expensive, it's like, you get one or two presidents in there that's like, I don't really like sports. I like playing my guitar in my 50s. It's like, that's how the athletic department goes downhill pretty quickly. So went there. I had a great time, but very quickly in California, you realize like, okay, this is kind of like a cool place to like visit, but it's not really a convenient place to live. And I think you also realize like, even if you don't, even like as a teenager, if you don't think of yourself as a Southerner, I think you don't realize how Southern you are until you like get in a room where there's none of you. And then you realize like, oh, you'll start doing this desperation move. Like, who's from Texas? Like, Texas used to never count as the South. But if you're in a room full of like California kids and you just need to hear somebody say y'all, all of a sudden Texas counts. Like, if a guy from Oklahoma has enough of a twang, you're like, bring your ass in here. Like, come on. Like, we're all. Like,
did you have the sweet tea withdrawals like I did when I got stationed in San Diego?
Yeah. I mean, the problem is like the sweet tea withdrawals then just became like, well, I guess I'm just going to crush 8 million Dr. Peppers. Like, but yes, I mean, you definitely have it. Like when you go from having it your whole life to like it never being there. And then when I was in college, then the Firefly vodka, like drink that would like taste like sweet tea, that became popular. And so then when you start to realize you're like going after your sweet tea craving with like really bad flavored vodka, that's a tough spot to be in. So like I feel like most like white kids that don't really know what they want to do, like you wind up just majoring in business and you're like, I don't know what's business. Like I have no idea, but it sounds good. And so like everyone just kind of winds up doing that. But because of that, I kind of like made a deal with my dad where it's like, he really like wanted me to get a degree that was useful. And I think that's because like he has an English degree and he's sold food his whole life. So I think he thought of like the people that had professional degrees got ahead and he was like behind, when in reality, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing here with this. And so I was like, all right, but I really want to do the sports stuff. He's like, well, it sounds like you can do that and get the degree in business. Why don't you do that? And it sounds like best of both worlds. It's like, that was kind of our compromise. And so like I was the play-by-play guy for baseball radio. I did basketball games. We had like a studio show. And so I did all that. But because I was kind of thinking of it as like fun, like, you know what I mean? Like, even though I got a paycheck from some of it, I didn't really like, it didn't click with me. Like, oh, this is a job. Like, because I think at a certain level, it's like, even if you know, okay, I've always been a good talker and I know a lot about sports. Like, you never really think of yourself like, oh man, I could be Mike Tirico. I can be Dan Patrick. Like, for me, it's almost like these people are like almost unreachable, when in reality, it's like, I would imagine the average sportscaster is closer to the top of the field than most professional. Like, a mid-tier minor league baseball player is nowhere near the top of the field at Major League Baseball. Like, when you think of it in those terms, but it's like, you can be a low A player in media and really not be that far off from being the best of the best. And so like, it never really clicked with me. So when I graduated, it's like, all right, I realized pretty quickly, I was like, I kind of want to go home. Like I at least go around, like figure out, like, you know, most of my friends were moving back to Memphis. Like most of my high school friends were still like most of my close friends today. It's like, I basically had the same friends since I moved to PDS in 4th grade. And so like everybody's moving back, but we're coming out of the recession at that point. And so nobody was really hiring. And so I wind up like getting frustrated, not finding like a real job for like 3 or 4 months. And then my dad has mentioned he sold food for a living, still does. ConAgra Foods like came calling and offered a job that paid a decent amount of money and had a car and like benefits. And so it's like, yeah, like at that point, you're just like willing to jump on anything.
Yeah.
And so then I moved out to North Carolina. And the truth is, like, I moved to Winston-Salem and I actually liked where I lived, but I do believe if you're miserable in your job, you're just going to hate whatever you're doing. Like, it doesn't matter. And that's exactly what it was. Like, I was calling on Walmarts and doing the retail food thing. And even though I was making decent money, I was saving a lot of money, but you're just miserable. So like one day,
and then you only got Wake Forest out there. I mean,
but it's like, you know, but your Greensboro's right there. Like, so then you've got, you know, and UNC's like 90 minutes away. Like I was within 90 minutes of Duke, North Carolina, NC State.
Yeah, the amount of because we do every college. Me and Daniel have talked about that. I mean, North Carolina is absolutely stacked, and especially because we cover a lot of college baseball. I mean, it is so baseball heavy. It's crazy.
All the Carolinas in baseball, and like that's where like when my brother, who was my middle brother who played college baseball, actually both my younger brothers did, but his summer assignment was High Point in North Carolina. So like they even have like the college summer leagues, like the wood bat leagues. Like, okay, it's not the Cape, but it's like it's another really high level of that kind of summer baseball assignments. And so I remember one day thinking like that was kind of around the birth of podcasting becoming like a legitimate forum. And so I'd be driving around North Carolina, just kind of listening to podcasts. I'm like, all right, well, what is it like I want to do? Because like I know I don't want to do this. And so then I started thinking of people that had careers that I liked, and I was trying to decipher, okay, what is it about these people that is there like a common link that they have? And I realized most of the common link for all of them was they had some degree in writing. And so at that point, I'm like, all right, I'm going to quit this and I'm going to go get my master's in journalism. And while also kind of like I had enough experience in the audio fields, like I'm going to kind of look for people that want to start where I am. And then at that time, my now mentor, Neil McCready, was at Rivals and covering Ole Miss. And they were at the beginning of podcasting. And because the state of Mississippi doesn't really have great sports talk radio, it was a perfect spot because people, even if you don't have great sports talk, you're still searching for good sports talk if like you're into it. And so because of that, even though it was considered an Ole Miss show, even though if you know my old boss, like he's like very aggressively non-Ole Miss, but at the same time, it's like it still has the perception of being an Ole Miss show. And I remember early as like I was trying to get gigs in Mississippi. It's like, well, they're so like political about, are you an Ole Miss State guy? It's like I'm just doing radio. Like, what do you want me to do? And so I get lucky there. I hook up with him and I basically lie saying I can do a bunch of stuff that I couldn't do technically speaking, but I was like, whatever, I'll figure it out. And so I on paper became like his video guy. I knew how to do enough audio editing from like playing around on GarageBand and playing music in high school. Like I could put a podcast together, but from the video editing, like, so I learned all that. And then as I'm working for him and technically in grad school, the podcast really starts to blow up. And through that, I start to realize like, okay, I'm a part of this, but it's not my thing. Like, and I'm super proud of it. Like I helped. I think without me, they don't get the audio product where it was and understand if that was important. So like I'm super proud of that, but it's like it still was never going to be my thing. And at that point, I'm getting really sick of like Oxford is always, whenever you see Oxford in all these lists, I always point out it's usually like 48 hours in Oxford, like great place to be. I was like, try 365 days there. Like it's pretty slow. And it's like, no offense to anyone that lives there. Like it's slow. And most of my friends that still live there, like they know they've heard this rant before. So it's not like that. So it was never like I targeted 92.9, even though like I grew up in Memphis listening to Calkins and Lapidus and Rain Man and Stats. The list goes on and on of like all our classics. Like I'll never forget Rain Man dropping the Eli Manning's the sixth best quarterback in the West. Take your phone calls on it next. I was like, damn, that's good stuff.
That's so good. That's
golden. You can't beat that. But it wasn't like 92.9 was a destination, largely because like I'm like, I'm not there. Well, the summer of 2016 is when Vernon and Intercom at the time, now Odyssey, get into the contract dispute. Mm-hmm. And so
it's crazy it's been that long, by the way.
I know. Well, what was crazy is on my LinkedIn, which I never check. So for anyone out there that tries to get a hold of me on LinkedIn, like don't ever get a hold of me on LinkedIn or Facebook. I like just tweet me, like DM me. They're open. Like I will respond to those as long as it's not like, hey, F you. And usually I respond to those too. But
that's Jim.
yeah, I mean, like to me, it's like,
that's how I get a hold of him. I tweet him.
well, and like I always do it very passive aggressively, like thanks for listening. Like it's never like a F you too. Like you know what I mean? Like it's because I do feel like there's nothing worse than like when you really are mad at someone you think like you just like fired off, like got him. Like watching someone really not care that much in response, like it's like, ah man, that kind of stings a little bit more. So I enjoy like putting that back at him. But on my LinkedIn, it's like this last week was my 8th year there. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of depressing. But when I see Vernon leave, I kind of knew how radio works. It's like, all right, I can't get my own show there, but like more times than not, what happens is somebody already there gets rotated up and it opens up a bullpen spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so my high school math teacher went to college with Calkins. And so I texted him one day. I was like, hey, I don't know so Vernon leaves and I'm like, I'm keeping my eye on it. And then when I see John Martin gets promoted to the midday show, that was when I texted my old teacher. I was like, hey, I don't know if Jeff's looking for a producer, but like, I know he's got an empty spot. Could you put my name out there? And so he did. And then Calkins calls me like the next day and kind of like interviews me on his own, which I guess kind of makes sense because at that point, if they offer somebody to Calkins and he's like, no, they're going to listen to that. But if also he's like, all right, I want this guy enough, like they have to also listen to that.
Well, I feel like they got to mesh with him because I think the reason him and John work so well, that was one of the biggest draws to me when I first started listening to Memphis radio was the way him and John, you had the older guy versus the young guy, and they would, go back and forth with each other was very entertaining. And so I feel like you got to have that chemistry that works well on radio. Especially
with Jeff, there has to be a chemistry. It doesn't even have to be like because like I, to a certain degree, like I'm self-conscious coming in, like knowing that even though I'm a little bit older than John, I know I'm just going to be considered to the new audience that has no idea who I am. I'm just new John. And so you're a little conscious of that. It's like John and I are not all that similar, but like we both can be
You're not similar at all.
Like you see what I'm saying? Like if we do like the way we kind of present can be similar, even though like interest, everything not. So, but you're just hyper aware of that. But also with Calkins, if you're Calkins' producer, he's going to heavily use you as a crutch. It's either going to be, hey, he is going to ask a horribly leading question that he doesn't want to talk about and put you on the spot, and then come across as good guy. Or it's just like, you just have to be on. Like you really have to be on. And then you also, at the same time, he has to like you because, so like that's a huge dynamic. And so really it went from him interviewing me or whatever, calling me to the next day, Brad calls me and like within 3 or 4 days, I'm up in Memphis meeting with Dan Barron and then they offer me the job. It's like a 6-day turnaround. And so I go from having like no real prospects to all of a sudden like, okay, sweet, I'm moving home, like, which was awesome. Like, and I'm fired up to move home. And it's like, it happened like that. And then, they also needed like cheap labor. And so because Eric at the time, Hasseltine, was traveling so much, like they knew like we're going to have somebody host the 2 to 4 show. Gary was always flying back and forth. And so they knew they were going to need like, rather than paying somebody per show, like, hey, let's get somebody on salary that's cheap and have them be on the air. And that's also reps and that's airtime and that's exposure. And so really that just kind of, I want to say it was probably I think April. So that was November of 2016. And I think I got my own show in April of 2020.
So one of the questions I had on here, because you talked about they rotate, move up. So you went there with the expectations of having the opportunity to actually have your own show.
Yeah. I don't think you get into the business thinking like I'm going to be the best behind the scenes guy. And
yeah,
if I would have, like, if that's what my future was, like, that's fine. but like I don't think I don't really feel like anyone in this position thinks like that. But like let's be clear. Paul Pabst of the Dan Patrick Show is 8 times the radio professional I am, probably worth God knows how much more money than I am. And it's like he's never had, the Pabst Show or the PBR, if you will. And so like there are other ways of getting around it. But like yes, I do think like I didn't have like a 10-year like plan written out, but like basically what I'd always said was when I quit the job in North Carolina, I was like, all right, I've got till 30 to make some type of progress that says I'm not just sitting around pretending like I'm playing Mike and Mike. And then I was actually like making real progress. And I got the gig, I think at 28, but it was also coming up at that point where it's like, all right, I'm not quite ready to like give it up, but like I was starting to do all right, you start, like when you kind of like Google research, like careers to start in your 30s, it's like, all right, am I going to try to dabble in some real estate? Like, it's like, or, at some point you're just going to go back and sell something. And so like, I was starting to do that. And then this gig came up, and so it was my wife reminds me it was 2019 when I got my own show. So now
the only other question I had and I had showed you on the notes, like, cause you mentioned it too, because you were saying, you didn't feel like you were there yet. When you have guys like GP and Vernon, like, is there like an intimidation factor or like a pressure to like match them, or do you just go in doing your own thing and you're not really worried about it?
So obviously it's difficult to say with Vernon because Vernon was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And also like the rise of GP is kind of in that period post me moving away from college. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so, cause I think I want to say Gary's show was like 09. Like that's when that thing, like I know they had.
I always thought the best part about Gary's show was that everybody was going to talk the same subjects all day. So that's why he would go out of sports a lot, because he didn't want to hammer the same content his whole episode. And I thought that made him great, because the last thing you want to do is hear, because I listen to all the shows across the board, and you don't want to hear the talk about the same team for the 4th time, And so I always liked it. And, some people didn't like it because he strayed into some gray areas, right? But I thought it was what made him fascinating.
Yeah, I think, and I don't actually think it was intentional. Everyone's already said this. Like, one thing you realize, like working with columnists, like they do fear saying what's already been said. Like they do want to have the unique take. I really don't think, though, for the most part with Gary, that's it. I think it's, if he's not interested, he just doesn't really want to talk about it. Like, you know what I mean? Like and I think that's why he's very good at it, because like there's a reason why Gary's not going to spend like an hour and a half talking about the NFL. Whereas like I can spend an hour talking about towel placement of quarterbacks. It's like, that's kind of what I'm into. Like you know what I mean? Like, and neither one is like, Gary's obviously more accomplished and a better talent than I am, but it's like, it doesn't make one subject, like, or the topic selection better than the other. So I didn't have like the intimidation factor or the wait till they get a load of me. Like, you know what I mean? I do think when you come in young, it's like, oh, I got some new ideas. I'm fresh. I'm young. I didn't have that. Now, what I definitely 100% had, which is, oh my God, I'm working with Jeff Calkins. Mm-hmm. Like, I was the kid that got the sports page out every single day and read Jeff Calkins. Like, I can still recite funny lines from his columns in, the 90s and the 2000s. So there was a reverence for him, but it wasn't like an intimidation factor. Like, it's more of like to kind of a certain degree, it's like, you don't want to upset your professional dad. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's like, you crave his approval. It's not even like you crave his like good job. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of what you just want an attaboy from him. Like, that's really all you care about.
That's what my dad asked me. He was like, you're listening to, 92.9. I'm like, yeah. He was like, well, who's still on there? And I was explaining it to, he's like, Jeff Calkins has been there. Like, he's a writer. He's been around for forever. And I was like, yeah, he's like the dad of the program.
No, there's no question. Like, he's like it all clearly starts with him. Like, it's not coincidence that local content starts with Jeff Calkins. Like
Mhm.
maybe it was eventually, like at a certain point it was because like of Jeff's schedule, but like now there's a reason why like he sets the table. Like he gets the first word, and like, that's for a reason.
It's my favorite transition because I listen to, obviously before that you have the national ESPN show with Chris Canty and them, and it's perfect because they'll always, hammer everything that's the nationwide, especially, the bigger market teams. And then you get a nice transition to the hometown team and talking about all the current topics. So I actually, it's my favorite time segue getting into that 9:00 morning show.
Yeah. I'm very grateful that ESPN National fixed that morning show because man, it was getting bad. Like it was getting really bad. Like I actually think though, I think on sports and like I found myself like randomly, this isn't even like plugging our own stuff. Like I found myself driving in one day and I was like, these guys are good. Like they're actual radio people. Like they're doing a much better job because man, for a while, like you're sitting there going like, man, when your lead in sucks, like it's one of those situations where if I worked for anyone other than Jeff Calkins, I would be very, very worried and nervous because it's like if our lead in sucks, but it's like because it's like Jeff might as well be his own lead in. Like in the end, it's like he is the attraction. And so if it were anyone else, I would have been concerned, but because it's him, I'm not.
Daniel, speaking of, that's a perfect segue because yesterday, man, the radio and today on the radio, and it hit different. You know why?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we've all been waiting for and hoping for almost 2 years now. Just having that feeling where everything is meshing together, where everyone is playing to potential and everyone is healthy and everyone's back. But I'll start with the Tigers. Obviously, Penny, it's arguably one of the biggest wins of his tenure at Memphis. They take down number 2 team UConn, and I would ask you, you cover them on a day-to-day basis. Is it more about what Memphis did or more about what UConn didn't do? Because I feel like Memphis from the start, like they were like, for lack of a better terms, they Memphis UConn. Like they just put their will against them and made it very difficult for them.
I think the intelligent answer is we don't know. You know what I mean? Because here's what I do know. I know that when they went up against UConn for 45 minutes of basketball, if you just took away jerseys and whatnot, you're just sitting there, you have no context, and you're telling somebody you're watching 2 teams, which one's better? They were dead even. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so at a certain point, I am trusting that UConn is going to be there in the end. And so that is going to be a standard that you compare well to. And I do think what is also very true about this team is that I don't think it's lip service when he and those around the program say this team's built more in his image. It's built much more to his liking. And I also think it's true that his guard plays better. And so if you look at it in these terms of, all right, he's got 2 really good experienced guards. His team's tough. Like I think it's undeniable this team's physically tougher than last year's. And I would even say that when they were winning. Like there's a different intensity with this team.
You also have guys that have been around and have played high level basketball. I mean, even Tyrese Hunter, I mean, he's a guy who comes from a big program into your program, so this isn't a stage that he's unfamiliar with. But then you get Musa coming back, and like, say what you will about Musa and him, the journey to get back. He was defensive player of the year for Oklahoma State, and so it's no surprise like he's got guys that are playing at, like, I would say, a more mature level than what we've seen in the past.
Now, what I'd also add to your point about Musa, like, hey man, this version of Musa that you got, this Musa's kind of gotten kicked in the ass a little bit. You know what I mean? Like life's kind of he's kind of had to learn, like, all right, maybe the first round NBA thing ain't gonna happen, but I can still be good, and there's still a role for me. And like to me, like that's kind of important. And I can understand if you're Penny Hardaway and your whole life in your hometown, no one's ever said anything negative about you. And everyone's always kissed your ass and said, thank you. You could live anywhere. You live here. Thank you. Thank you. You always promote the city, all that. And then all of a sudden, I'm now the head coach of the team that I think it's fair to say has the most passionate fan base. I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's certainly the most intense. And all of a sudden, you're getting the same questions that all of them get, by the way. It does not matter who your name is. They all eventually get it. And I can understand where that's a tough adjustment because you've gone like, hey, man, I'm doing you all a favor. But you signed up for this. You're the head coach. Like, nobody put a gun to your head. Nobody said, like, you wanted this job.
And at the end of the day, this job comes with heavy expectations, whether warranted or not. And I think he understands those. But if he thought he's fooling himself if he thought he was going to come in here and people were just going to just give him like the okay, hey, it's okay, pat on the back every day, type treatment. Because at some point, like you gotta put some stuff together, and it looks like we're in a spot where we're moving in the right direction. I say moving in the right direction only because I'm still gun shy, man, about last season.
I think that's why when you ask, like, I understand asking that question because I think if you're someone that has ever put your feelings out there and been burned, I think the first question is when you hear and watch, we beat UConn. After last year, I think it's fair to go, is UConn good? Like, this is like, I think it's a fair thing to ask. And then you beat Michigan State today. It's like, is Michigan State good?
Is it fair to ask, is UConn good after you watch them lose now 2 in a row? And I'll say this, the guy for Colorado who made that shot at the end, like he wasn't expecting to make that shot.
No, I think, though, the reason why I don't think it's fair. I think what is true is UConn's in the midst of figuring out what their pecking order is going to be. Like, I think UConn in March is going to be a lot different than UConn the next couple of months.
Well, I think the biggest part about the game, and I thought Jason said it perfectly on his show, when they tied it and was going to overtime, you already started making excuses in your head and justifying, well, you know what, we played them tough. You were already coming up with the reasons why it was okay that we lost, because in your mind, the typical Memphis team and what you know about UConn, they were going to go to overtime and lose. And I thought it said a lot, and you talk about maturity and everything, that they pulled that out in overtime because, when you blow that lead at the end, you start thinking, okay, UConn is who they are.
No, and I mean, it's not even blowing of the lead. Like, honestly, the first 2 minutes of overtime, like, all right, we like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like that their effort gave up. It's just like, all right, you kind of knew eventually. Like, I always used to liken it to at the peak of Saban, Alabama, even if you got like a couple of score lead on them, you better have kept on scoring because you knew the longer the game went on, eventually, like, they were going to figure something out. Like, they were going to find something that worked, and then they were going to hammer it. And all of a sudden, this game's coming down last possession one way or the other. And so I kind of felt like that. But to me, like, I think the reason why I believe it's also a little bit different is I do not believe last year's team was a mediocre team that smoke and mirrored their ways to a good non-conference record. What I believe, because I watched them in person a couple of times, and I know what I saw. It's like, no, they got dudes. Like, what they did to Virginia, like, honestly, like, what they did to A&M, like, there were times where you're like, they got dudes. I think what happened, though, is that was a remarkably fragile team. And that was a team that, beyond being fragile, Penny made a big mistake. And I get why he did it, but he made the big mistake of basically saying the whole season was the non-conference season.
Yeah.
And when they flipped the switch to, honestly, it was even kind of before. If y'all think back to when they played Vanderbilt at home, like, that was the first kind of like real sleepy, like, I mean, they won. Like it was that class, and that's kind of like how you said, like you justified in your mind, like never apologize for being 13-2. Like like you justify that. But if you're honest with yourself, you will admit leaving that game, you're like, I didn't like what I saw, and so like I think that was kind of the beginning of it, and then Penny has always struggled, and I think it's largely because the team names in the conference are not the team names that he used to get fired up playing himself. His teams have never really like
the Rice Owls don't fire you up.
No, and I mean that's the other thing. Like and I don't blame them. Like when you're having to talk yourself into the Florida Atlantic game is like must see entertainment.
Yeah.
Like I think we can all acknowledge, like with all due respect to like, and I always hate when they're like, Memphis hasn't won anything. Like, what are you just being a prick by saying it's like we can acknowledge when we hear FAU, we don't think basketball school. And we don't think of like, doesn't mean you can't put together a great team. Doesn't mean you didn't deserve everything that you just did. But we can all acknowledge there's not a lot of like something that stirs in the soul playing FAU. And
there's no feeling you get like you played a conference game against a Cincinnati or a Louisville.
And so like, even if we use the example of like Cincinnati's program, the last 2 years was not as good as FAU's program.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, to your point, they were talking on local radio. Jeffrey knows this at every show. Did this win feel like bigger than Houston, right? Because Houston was such a big deal in conference and a rival. So while UConn is, defending national champ, it doesn't feel as good as your conference rival who's been the big dog for X amount of years.
Well, I think that question you got to answer at the end of the season. Like that's
I mean, like that's the other thing. It's like, did anybody care that Arkansas ended up when they beat Arkansas in the Bahamas? Did anyone really care that Arkansas sucked?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like now, like if you want to do the move of, it's why to me there is a debate of whether or not last year was a bad team that kind of smoke and mirrored their way to a good record. It's because we saw a lot of the teams that on paper like had brand exposure recognition. Those teams wind up not being good. Now, I can also point out a lot of those teams fell apart themselves, and that probably is going to be a hallmark of this era, in which teams that are put together on the fly, when they start to have a little adversity, if they don't have good culture, if they don't have toughness, they don't have good leadership, those teams are going to fold. And the biggest reason why I feel like it's different this year is I think he has significantly better leadership. Like as I've gotten a little bit older, it's one of those things that like I feel like when I was playing sports, I knew it. So it's like all the way through 18. But then that period where you stop playing sports really competitively, other than like flag football and golf, or some pickup. But like you get away from the being in a team every single day, the locker room, the experience of being around a team that often. I think in that like window, you start to realize like, okay, I kind of become more of a sucker for talent than I do anything else. And maybe it's not even necessarily me getting older. Maybe it's me recognizing the era that we're in where because everything is put together so quickly, like you have to have good leadership. Otherwise, these teams are going to be directionless because everything's basically put together on the fly. And so maybe that's it more than anything. But it's like, I think I'd much rather have Tyrese be my leader than Javon Quinterly.
Yeah, I was going to say that you brought that up. You said, Daniel, he said on the show that he was good at basketball, but he didn't feel like he actually loved playing the game.
Yeah, that's how I always felt about Quinterly. And we all kind of know this guy or this gal that's like really good at something, but they don't really love it. And so like they kind of do it. That's what I always felt about Quinterly was like, I think he's really good at basketball and he can make money. And it was like a way to make a job. Like, it became a job at a certain point. Like you can make real money. And I mean
everyone was bashing Nate Oates about what he said about Javon Quinterly. And to be honest, it was
he told the truth.
100% truth. Yeah. So if you could be mad about it all you want, but he knew when the guy left what was leaving, and he wasn't sad about that one bit.
Daniel, I got a question for you. I was looking ahead at the schedule. I had said something to you about the lack of home games, but are you going, if Ole Miss and Mississippi State stay on course and Memphis stays on court, you gonna come back to Memphis for Christmas, man, and watch them play Ole Miss and Mississippi State at home?
Nah, bro. I'm gonna save it for when they come down here to USF, and
But it's not as fun as playing Ole Miss and Mississippi State, man.
No, the greatest thing, my wife and I, Jeffrey, we were talking about like how just like Thanksgiving for us, like my parents used to live in Memphis and now they've since moved closer to where we're at. And so it was always like this big to do for Thanksgiving. Like it was just very stressful, like who's coming where and doing what.
Oh God,
So
panic's the worst. Oh God. And then like having to do the like, all right, are we like, is it our year? Oh God, yeah.
So Memphis would play in Orlando during Thanksgiving, and it was great because we would just skip out on Thanksgiving for years and go to Orlando and watch the Tigers play their holiday tournament, and that would be our Thanksgiving. So now out in Maui, it's not, quite
Go to
as
Maui for Thanksgiving, man.
I wish.
Yeah, I didn't even bother looking. I assume that's a $10,000 trip. Like that's obviously not something that's even in my price. But
what was funny, Jeffrey, was this Daniel brought up to me because I was like, dude, the Tigers don't play at home at all. And he was like, in order to play good teams, he's like, we have to go to them. And so you look at the feeling.
I mean, I'm a little bit more hopeful. The problem is Cal get the Arkansas job, which I actually think for Arkansas's perspective, I think that was kind of a good thing. Like I think Cal's got one more run in him. Like I really think he can. He's a petty enough individual that, all right, I lose the Kentucky job. I'll show you. Like, does that mean I think he's gonna have another decade run? No, but it's like you talk me into a 5-year run. Like I can see him being that man is built on spite, and so I can see where he does this. But also because of that, it's like they were kind of getting closer to getting the Arkansas series back.
Yeah,
and it's like I just think that, man. Like I miss like when I'm growing up and like the Tigers schedule in the fall, it's like the basketball schedule. They're playing Arkansas, they're playing Ole Miss, they're playing Mississippi State. It's like they got to play all the regional rivals, and now it's like it feels like it's becoming more difficult than ever to schedule them, even for basketball only series. It's not like Memphis is asking them to attach a football series with it. Like they just want the basketball games.
Well, I haven't got to watch Ole Miss, but I've watched Mississippi State. They appear like they're going to stay good until Memphis plays them. So that one should be bar. Hopefully both stay hot as well as Memphis, and those two matchups, and especially in a week span at home, end up being everything I hope they are.
I haven't gotten a look at either. I do know every Chris Jantz team's the same. Like that team's going to be tough. Like that's going to be a rock fight, and you better be willing to go.
Well, it's cool because you kind of do the ACC thing, and you got Clemson and Virginia back to back on the road, and then you come home and you got the SECs back to back. So that's a cool 4-game stretch altogether.
Well, the other thing though with their schedule is like they kind of do the move of like one year they lost a game, and because of that they had to move one game. Like everything got out of whack because they had to move a road game to a home game, and then like that set everything back. Like. And so they were trying to backfill it from there, but I don't know. I mean, the homes, like the problem, it's not even necessarily that the home schedule's bad. It's that the conference is bad. Like, I actually think the non-con home schedule is pretty good. Like, I think there's only like one gross bye game.
I also think there's a lot that goes into, hey, yeah, it's nice to have these home non-con games that are good and high profile. You're going to put butts in seats. But nothing compares to wins on the road against these high-profile non-con teams because those things matter when you're talking about getting out of an 8 and 9 seed matchup.
Well, let's also confront another, elephant in the room. While the AAC is not maybe getting better, it's getting bigger, and so now these conferences are getting bigger, and you're having to play more conference games. Yeah. And so because you're playing more conference games, you got a smaller buffet of non-con games, and like, I mean, that's the funny thing. It's like Memphis is not going to play a team, that's going to be like a 200 team or worse in the net until conference play.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see it in football. It's like these football teams are losing their big time rivalry games because they're in these conferences where they're beating the shit out of each other, and they're like, I'm not playing. Like I need wins.
Well, if we've learned anything the last few weeks of college football, the win-loss record matters more than like in the end, the number in the loss column is going to be more significant than, did you play a tough schedule?
Right.
I'm just glad that when they because obviously this wasn't part of the show. We were going to talk Memphis, but just, Daniel, I sent you that thing on the projections of the CFP. I'm so glad that didn't happen because, you have Arizona State and you have SMU in there. Like, do not find a way to push Alabama back in there. That was absurd.
I mean,
there's still time left, boys.
There's still some time.
I know that if this was to play out the way it is, which still time, obviously, the SEC championship, stuff like that. But if Tennessee, Georgia played each other in the first round, Tennessee ain't gonna like that at all.
No, but I also don't think Greg Sankey's gonna like that at all. And I think he's in the end. I think he's gonna have something to say about it.
We'll come back to the Grizzlies since we're on college football. Let's talk Memphis Tulane.
Right.
I guess the message is this: hey, you can go out. You don't for all intents and purposes, you don't really have anything that you're playing for, really, except that you could ruin someone else's season. Is that the message, or is it, hey, let's find a bowl game that let's win and find a bowl game, or is it just the simple fact that Tulane's ranked and they're good?
You better win, or you're gonna end up in the
house.
Birmingham Bowl. Is that where you want to be again?
I don't even know if that matters because honestly, who the hell's gonna be on the team? That's the other thing. Portal opens up in December 8th, 9th, something like that. Who even knows at that point? I think the message is this, right? Have the seniors beat them?
I don't think we've beat a Tulane team.
It's been at least, right? They've won at least 3 in a row, right?
Yeah. So Seth Hennigan may not have beat them at all.
And for Hennigan, and that's why I put on the notes, Daniel. This is a legacy game for him, I feel like, because there's a lot of things that have been good, but a lot of things that you just haven't panned out the way you want, and you want it to end on a good note.
Yeah. I agree with that to an extent, but Seth Hennigan's legacy at Memphis isn't going to be, to me, it's not categorized as beating Tulane. It's categorized as, holy shit, this kid was actually very loyal in a time where you didn't have to be.
I think this is one of those games
what you did.
Jeffrey talks about this all the time. I don't feel like there's an in-between on this game. I think either Memphis wins or Tulane hands it to them. And that's why I feel like it's significant.
You could easily see Memphis getting blown out just because, like I said, what's there to play for? But I also think if Memphis plays a little bit of defense, I think they're going to be able to put points up. I don't think that's going to be an issue.
So I had the game notes pulled up. I was trying to see series history because I feel like they have not won this game in at least 3 years, right? So let's go back. I don't think Seth's beaten them.
Yeah, I don't,
because I know there was 1 year down there. I guess that was his sophomore year. His sophomore year down there, remember they had a fake comeback where
the win streak's 4 games, it says on the Tulane website.
Tulane's won 4 straight.
Mm-hmm.
So there's your message is, hey man, no one in that room has beaten them.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then I don't necessarily think it's ruining their season because in the end, they're still
going to play. Yeah.
They're still going to play likely Army in the title game. And if Army loses to UTSA, which I kind of think's on board this week, they're still probably going to host the game. But I don't know. The other thing is, I think you kind of want to establish you're playing in your 3rd straight title game and we haven't played in one, but we're still the 2 best jobs. Maybe the schedule didn't play out this way and the standings but we're still the 2 best teams. And I think you don't want to risk never having an opponent know what it's like to lose to you. At a certain point, it's maybe even though if it's not quote unquote significant, you kind of for a team to have in the back of their mind, they kind of kicked our ass last year.
And I think as fans, Daniel, when you've lost 4 straight to somebody, it's significant. This game's got to feel significant to you.
Yeah, you want to.
Well, honestly, down there, I don't remember, Daniel. They have not played well there in a decade.
No, it's a tough place for them as far as
even when years were Memphis,
even if you won the game, like it's still not. It's
Oh,
not historically been a very good, well played game for either team, for that matter. But I think they can win. I think they're like when they're at their best. I think that they can play with anybody. But the problem is they're never consistently at their best. It's always some aspect of the game isn't good.
it always feels to me like if you think about the losses, they didn't like play badly in any of them. But there's always a moment where you like blinked and you're like, oh God, we're gonna lose. Like the Navy game, if you think about it, it's like honestly, my fear in the Navy game was all right, you come out flat, Navy pops you in the mouth, they get up 2 scores, and you don't touch the football for an hour. And then you're all of a sudden you're panicking and you're like, God, we have 4 possessions left and we're down 17. Like how we gotta start this. But really it wasn't that at all. Like Memphis came out and hit the first punch.
Yeah.
And then like kind of in the first quarter, I'm thinking like, damn, this is gonna be kind of impressive. Like you back up the Florida State thing. This was kind of a trap spot. Like you're gonna back that up. But then the second quarter happens and you like blink and you're like, oh, they're not gonna win. And then kind of the same thing happened in the UTSA game where I was like, this is kind of a sneaky, not fun spot because UTSA hadn't a good year, but like this would be the perfect day to like spoil somebody's season. And then it's the same script. It's like, all right, Memphis looks pretty good. And then you look up in the third quarter and you're like, oh, they're going to lose. But like it happens like that in almost every loss.
Yeah. What's your thought on this contract for Silverfield? I mean, it's not his fault in any regard. Like
breaking news: Jimmy Sexton's good at what he does. I mean, I did think way too much was getting made out of Ed Scott's quote unquote vote of confidence because I looked at it like, what is Ed gonna say? Like, if Ryan would have won, I think at that point Ryan just had to win one of his last 2 or one of his last 3 to get the extension, and he was going to be a 3 touchdown favorite in 2 of the games.
Yeah,
it was an automatic extension, and if he won all 3, it was an automatic 2-year extension. So I think any reasonable person would sit there and go like, why would I come out and like say anything that's unlikely to happen? Like and cause unnecessary friction. And like, let's also be real about the scoreboard right now. Like Memphis is trying to spend and raise a lot of money to do a lot of things. And they are not interested in this point about paying people not to work.
Very true. You would pay Brian Kelly to not work, but it's $60+ million and it ain't gonna happen.
But like to me, it's the same kind of thing. Like, all right, let's look at college athletics right now across the board. In an era that is largely categorized by unbelievably irrational spending, all-time peak highs of dead money, like all of these things about poor business practices. Guys, it took until today to have our first Power 4 opening. And basically, like, North Carolina was basically saying, like, hey, man, we tried to, like, ask you nicely to leave, and you didn't. So now, like, we're going to say thank you, and we're going to say goodbye on Saturday, okay? Like, that's what we're going to do.
The most
you're fired, but by the way, we're going to need you to show up and do your job.
When you talk about money, the most asinine thing in college football today was Dave Portnoy actually putting that video out and literally talking about him and 2 other people over a Zoom call talking about how much money they were going to spend to get Underwood. And I understand how NIL and everything works, but literally having people just saying they're going to put in millions of dollars to get a guy is not the way I functionally see it. It's somebody who's done over 1,000 NIL deals, Jeffrey. That's just plain out paying for a player, which is not what you're supposed to be able to do.
Yeah. I also think like it's when you say like the quiet part out loud, or there's this weird thing of, we know it happens, but when you see the video of the mechanics of it, and I'm not equating paying a quarterback $2 million a year to hitting a woman, but it's one thing to know Ray Rice hits his fiance it's another thing when you see the video and he absolutely knocks her out. Like, all of a sudden it goes from 2-game suspension to that guy's never playing football ever again. And I'm not equating it, but like, you understand, like, it doesn't mean that anything changed. We knew what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But what changed is we saw what happened. And it's like there's something wired in us that when we see kind of the slimy stuff done like in plain sight, we're like, I don't like that. Like, I don't because
it's like what happened with Cam Newton back in the day that everybody knew but didn't, like you said, couldn't functionally see, is now happening in the wide open. Nobody cares.
It's an ongoing investigation.
We know the truth.
Yeah.
Highest
literally, Mississippi State turns him in. Why? Well, we paid him 180.
I mean,
like that was what I was laughing at. I was like, they literally like, well, we know what we paid him.
And think about we talk about inflation in this country. You're talking about 180. Now we're talking about 10 million for a quarterback. Good grief! You imagine what Cam Newton would go for on the market today?
Well, I don't even necessarily think that's inflation. I think what that is more than anything is what happens when a black market, which is a controlled market, and it's only the only people operating are willing participants, and all of a sudden it's all made men, and it's like we got a code. To all of a sudden you're opening it up to the whole market. And now this is what is always going to be fascinating. And it's also why I think you saw the SEC change its tune as quickly as they did. And here would be my point on that. Alabama and Auburn operated extremely efficiently and extremely effectively in the under the table world. When I covered recruiting through about 2016, the best roster in the country, depending on like the ultimate accuracy of the number, but I feel pretty confident saying the best roster in the country was about $4 million. Well, in a span of 8 years, the best reported roster is $20 million. So we went 4 times in that time period. And the difference between when I started covering recruiting, the difference was maybe, I don't know, Alabama's roster 1 year cost 3.5. The next year, 4 years later, it costs 4. So like it was largely the same number. But now what we've done is we've taken the cost of a roster and made it go up 4x. And by the way, you can't make more rich people in the SEC. Like we are what we are. Like there's a reason it's cheap to live here. Like you come be a millionaire here and you will literally live like a billionaire anywhere. Like, I mean, like when you just consider it. But that doesn't change the price of why does a kid care whether or not I've got, John Ruiz's money versus the Yellowwood money? Like he doesn't care. Like which one pays more? They both cash the same. But so what we've started to see is I think the SEC's changed its tune on all this and going like, yeah, we got to do the revenue sharing right now. It's because all right, well, that's how we're gonna have to we can't if this stays in this insane whoever's willing to pay essentially live golf sums. It's like, well, then we're never gonna be. It's like the PGA Tour eventually goes, all right, let's settle. Like we can't keep spending like a foreign royalty that has oil money. Like we can't keep spending like that.
What's great is they try to say that Bryce flipped after Alabama beat LSU. No, that was just timing. Money talk, plain and simple.
I mean,
yeah, I don't even really think anyone believes that. But I would also point out to this, like my old co-host is a diehard Michigan fan. I was like, I missed the part where Bryce is suited up for the Wolverines yet. Like, there's one thing I know about LSU. When it comes to bidding wars, they're highly competitive.
That's why I don't put it out of the realm. If I told people, and I told Daniel, it said if LSU would have lost to Vandy and then followed through with losing to Oregon or Oklahoma and lost 5 in a row, I said somebody might just come up with the money to do that buyout.
Well, I mean, it's in the end, it's what happened to Jimbo.
Mm-hmm.
The buyout was too much until finally it's like, we've lost enough to where
I never thought, Jeffrey, I'd be able to put the words together to say that beating Vandy would save someone off the hot seat. You never thought you'd say those kind of words about Vandy.
Yeah, but how much do you think Tennessee would pay to beat Vandy this week?
What? And Vandy, and we were talking about spoiler earlier. man, there's nothing Vandy. A year in which they beat Alabama and Tennessee would be the
And
greatest
Auburn.
in history.
And literally, like, I'm not kidding you. I bet Tennessee would pay $20 million to beat Vandy this year. Because if they win, I think that's largely going to be a home playoff game. I think it's highly likely they're going to have a home playoff game. And
Winning and not playing in the championship game is going to be the biggest thing that could happen for them.
Well, but it's like, all right, if you tell me they're going to get one more home game and it's going to be a playoff game, I guarantee you they're going to make more than $20 million off of it.
Yeah.
Daniel, we got in off the bench crime with that game. We got Maurice Hampton Jr. versus Dylan Sampson.
Mo, baby.
Let's go.
Mo, baby. That's my boy.
If you think he didn't say it on the show, but Jeffrey, you think if he go back in time, he would have took that baseball contract that was offered out of high school?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
We didn't ask him. We didn't want to put him on the spot like that.
Jeffrey,
I think, not I know, because he played for my dad too. I think there's a lot of people that like to have a do-over.
Oh, but yeah, there's a lot of people who say they have no regrets in life. But a couple $1 million and going straight to the pros and not. I mean, he does have the national championship at LSU, and he did get a little playing time that year, so that's that. But after that, everything really went downhill, especially going to Stanford, and then he gets to Memphis. He gets hurt, doesn't even get on the field. It's a long track.
Yeah, and then obviously, like, hey man, it's one thing. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever been in a situation where you didn't have to play defense in football, and all of a sudden they're putting you on defense, and you don't really want to play defense. Like, I mean, literally, I used to make the joke, like, the greatest day of my life was the day that Coach Alston told us in between freshman and sophomore year, we're splitting up, you're on offense, and nobody's playing defense. It's like, that was the greatest day of my life. It's like, I don't want to have to do any of that anymore.
So we got a couple topics before we get out of here, man.
All right.
The Grizz, they're finally healthy. You get Ja Morant coming back.
Vince is hurt again, and Gigi hasn't played yet. But, like, yeah, for all intents and purposes, like, I think if you said
Ja comes back, gets the Sports Center number one, that's healthy to me.
I think if you basically say you can have Ja, Jaren, and Dez for, let's see, what are they now? They're 11-7, so that's 18. So if there are 62 remaining games, if you sit there and go, you can have them for 50, I think everybody signs up for it in blood.
Oh, I mean, I think you guys might have talked about it today, is that the number of games that those three have played since
I think it's so since the Shotgun Willies incident, which is of course my fantasy football team name. I think it's 30. And does that not feel like 10 years ago?
Yeah.
I think it's 30 since then.
And Ja's so significant because I told Dan I go to the game Sunday and Tuesday, and specifically Sunday when they won and they were knocking down threes, but they just didn't have anybody doing anything that was jaw dropping. And then you see what he does his first game back. It's just meaningful to have that dude play because you've talked about on the show 3-4 times a night. He's going to do something that just nobody else can do.
I mean, literally last night, it's the first game my wife and I have gotten to go to. We went to the Mart retirement jersey, but like that was not, we didn't go for the basketball game. I went to be with my boy. And it's like, you just realize like 5 minutes in, you're like, oh my God, this is like way better. And, I mean, that to me, so it's like, if we want to talk about how good can they be, the problem is it's all academic unless you can tell me he's going to be healthy. And it's like, because it's so crystal clear to me now. It's like, if he's there and he's healthy, I probably favor Oklahoma City. But there's also an element of Oklahoma City of like, you haven't been there yet. And, you stayed relatively healthy last year. They've had some injuries, but like, if it's full strength, Oklahoma City would be heavily favored.
I mean, I put it this way. Ja, when he's healthy and good, he reminds me of Derrick Rose prior to being hurt. And I think that's a realistic thing. And when you're talking about a guy who won MVP, that carries a lot of weight on how good a team can be.
I mean, I think it's truly possible Like, he was going to struggle to win MVP always because of the number of games he plays. But the other problem that they have is, like, because they're doing the approach of, like, basically keeping everybody under 30 minutes to do, like, the hockey line shift things because of the pace and whatnot, his numbers were going to be down because we always do per game average. But if you would have, like, multiplied and if he would have played the same amount of time that everyone else's stars were playing, like, Ja was going to have MVP numbers. And again, the problem with Ja was going to be number of games, but still, like, because he's playing a limited amount of minutes, but it's like last night he goes for 22 and 11. And I swear to God, like, he did it in like 15, 16 minutes. Like, I was laughing at, because we were watching last night in the game, and I look up and I see Ja's got 12, and I was like, all right, he's going to get 16 in the first half. And it's like, you look up and he got 18 and he hits a 3 from half court that gets waved off by a 10th of a second. Like it's just, it's so easy for him right now. But the whole problem is it does not matter if he's not there. Like, you can still have meaningful basketball games, but it's not going to be the ceiling, and it's not going to be anywhere close.
I mean, guys like that, it's funny going back to the Denver thing, because you said this on the radio, so Daniel didn't hear this. It's amazing what Denver's like when Jokic isn't there. My God, there's a reason why that guy's won MVP so many times.
Well, and especially even this year where it's like, they had the slow start and he was like, screw this. Like, I'll do it all myself. Like, and then his numbers were like, all of a sudden you're like, Jesus God, this guy's insane. And then it's like when he doesn't show up, but like, that's the problem. It's like when Ja's not on the floor and they don't play well, they can't win. Like, it's too hard. Like, they have to make like 40% of their threes, or they have to have another team have a abysmal shooting night. Like, it's not that it's impossible, but it's really difficult. And then if you factor in, okay, let's have it be a meaningful game where both teams are trying, like, it's just going to be impossible. But then it's like you realize, like, oh, when he's out there, all of a sudden everything looks easier. Like, the number of lobs, the number of guys that get wide open threes, it's because he is in such command, and he not only is in command, he commands so much attention that it just makes everything so much easier for everyone else.
Daniel, let me ask you. I'll ask you.
He's the reason you build. So when you have a guy like that, you're building a team off of that guy,
right?
Because he's your guy. So when he's not in the lineup, now you're having to modify the team that you built for him. And not that you can't do it, because these guys are professional players and they're good, but it's just not the same. I would argue that cutting his minutes, he's the type of guy who is going to be an intense player, and he's going to play as hard as he can. And if you tell me he's playing 30 minutes, the level of intensity might be an 8. But if you say he's playing 40 minutes or like more minutes, like his level of intensity might back down just so he could have the duration. So like, to me, if your number of minutes is lower, like, I could make the argument that he's going to come out more intense because he knows that he's going to have more in the tank.
Well, the problem with his intensity is you get scared every time he goes up, because he
right,
goes
and that's the thing.
Now, he also doesn't help that cause, because he's such a drama queen with, like, every time he gets a boo-boo. Like, that guy can scrape his knee and you literally think he got shot in the knee. Like, it's like he is intensely dramatic on injuries. Now, there's two problems. Number one, we're still in the lab. Like, they're basically testing something that not many teams have really committed to doing. So the idea that we can judge it in November is probably unreasonable. Now, what my fear is, and this is something that has been a problem for them, they have historically been one of the most organizationally conservative, cautious, overly cautious with injuries. And my whole deal on that is, if we got to every playoffs and the Grizzlies were in tip-top shape and they were healthier than everyone, I'd sit there and go, that's why you do it, man. Hey, in the end, that's why they do it. Yeah. But they don't. Like, they got just as many injuries, if not more, than everybody else when we get to the playoffs. And so if this is another way to maybe combat that, because I don't think I'm smart. I would imagine that they're having conversations that impact their jobs more than I am. So if this is another way to do it, all right. But the problem is we don't know until we get there. So, like, I would say this though. I think it's pretty proven in basketball more than any other sport. You better have your best guys on the floor for longer periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, what happens like if we're lucky enough to make it to the playoffs, which I think at this rate, let's just say we do.
I would be surprised.
They've got to extend these, like, that's when it matters. Like the minutes thing should be out the window at that point, and you should just let these guys rip, right?
I will say Taylor has a history of in the playoffs even cutting it down. Now, what it previously kind of looked like was he'd still play like the full complement in the first half. So like when it was a 9 or a 10-man rotation, he plays the 9 or 10, and then he'd cut it to like 7. And then if he gets in foul trouble, he cuts it to 8. So he does cut it down. The only problem that we don't know is like they've not played at this pace before. Like they played at more pace than what we were used to in the grit and grind era, but it's not like, you know, this pace, even compared to Ja Morant, like peak is significantly quicker.
Yeah. That says that youth, man. They got that youth, man. This dude's
I do think,
flying
though,
up and down the court.
You do make an excellent point, though, on the idea of when you have Ja Morant, you build a team around him. But also with that, where I do think they've wised up, they have added more shooting. But with more shooting has also come a lack of athleticism. Yeah. And so it is I think it's going to be –
the shooting's the way to go because as a Westbrook fan,
absolutely.
The way their games are similar, that was Russ's problem in Oklahoma City. There weren't any shooters around him.
And in the end, it's why I always I laugh so hard at LeBron. Like, he's so bad at building a team around him because it's like, dude, there's such a proven formula. Like, just put shooters around you. Like, it's worked every time. But he's so obsessed with name brands. It's like he's got to get his buddies in there. He's got to get somebody with a name. And it's like, dude, just put shooters around you. But the same thing holds true with Ja. Now, the problem will be if Ja's not on the floor, they better shoot like, 40% from 3. Because
they're going to need. They did that first game against the Nuggets, and that was right, a good.
They're going to need 140 points to win a game.
So,
Daniel, do you think they can, if they stay healthy, Daniel, do you think this team can legitimately contend for the Western Conference?
Yeah, why not? I mean, you go back and, that series that they got run off the court with Golden State a few years ago, that was ahead of schedule. And now we're where we need to be on schedule. Like, so what would be the difference? I mean, we don't have Dillon Brooks, and we have other guys that I think are much more capable than Dillon Brooks, even though I was a big Dillon Brooks fan. But yeah, I think they can. I mean, it's a gauntlet in the West, but it is what it is. I mean, if you took our record and put us in the East, we're up there. I mean, outside of Cleveland and Boston, like, you're the next best team. But I like Jeffrey, am going to be very conservative in my expectations just because the proof isn't in the pudding yet, because we can't stay on the court long enough to say, yes, like this is the team. Because two things are true. There's been a time where Ja's supposed to come back. He's come back, and then he's immediately left. So now, and then the second thing is we still have guys that are on the roster that are injured and should be difference makers for the depth and for the team that haven't played yet. So still got to hold out. But yeah, once everything is good, I think we're in good shape. Very exciting times.
Well, you got one more topic. I know this is your one, Jeffrey. I don't know nothing about it. But you got one more, you got a hammer.
All right, here we go.
What is the state of Memphis 901 Wrestling? I got to know.
Okay, so are we talking about the company 901 Wrestling, or are you talking about wrestling in the
quality wrestling in Memphis?
So there's two main companies locally, and my buddy Kevin Cerrito is heavily involved in the brand known as 901 Wrestling. And then there's also Memphis Championship Wrestling, which being in Tampa, so they've signed a deal with WWE.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like, because obviously Florida Championship Wrestling, basically Ohio Championship Wrestling, OVC and Florida Championship Wrestling merge and form what we know today as NXT, but then NXT becomes its own brand. So the developmental system away from the WWE spotlight cameras, being a part of the machine is kind of lacking. And so Dustin Starr is heading that up. It's his operation. And it seems like they're trying to become a developmental territory. So that's obviously going to have a different purpose than like what 901 Wrestling does, which is 901 Wrestling is trying to be like a good independent. And they're trying to be an independent that like gets butts and seats. And so I went to their show on Sunday night. And so the other problem that they've had is their venue, which they were killing it at Black Lodge, they closed down. So they've had to find a new venue. They're now at Minglewood, but they've gone from like Saturday night wrestling to now it's Sundays and it's like once a month. But like we had to bring in extra chairs on Sunday night. So like I was like, all right, that's a good thing. Like anytime you see management having to go wheel in more chairs, I was like, all right, well that's a good thing. It's way more character driven at 901 Wrestling. And I don't know. I just really think of it in the terms of like, it's kind of what's your flavor. It's like 901 Wrestling has like the good, solid, independent wrestling vibe that's like character driven, story driven, but it's not all it's not going to have the biggest names. Like you're not going to go there and every single wrestler you see, like be able to picture them as world champion. Like you're just not, but
Yeah,
it's a damn good show. Like, you know what I mean? Like now, like that's kind of the other thing. So, are we in the heyday of Coliseum wrestling? No, but it's still pretty good. And I think it's still in the end, like that is, even as maybe we get more removed from like the Mid-South territory days, it's still just going to be kind of a wrestling town. Like we just kind of like it.
I mean, it's entertainment and it's tradition entertainment that's been around for a long time. I mean, when one of your most famous figures in the Memphis area is Jerry the King Lawler, like that wrestling means something in that area.
Well, and traditionally wrestling has, traditionally it's done well in blue collar markets.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
I mean, Daniel, that game I went to last year, the Tigers football game, and they had the ring set up outside and had the dudes going at it. I mean, I don't know how many places you go where hundreds of people will actually merge on top of each other to watch two nobodies wrestle each other in the ring, but they did it because, like Jeffrey said, that's a blue collar thing.
It's fascinating.
Like we're all kind of about it. Like in the end, like like I don't know if it says something about us culturally one way or the other, but like I just kind of know like no one told me to like wrestling.
Well, we're the same ones that wave a towel and say, whoop that trick in a NBA arena. It only fits that we would actually like be all about some wrestling in the streets.
Yeah, I mean, like, come on, like in the end, like it's a fight.
Have you been in a ring? Have you taken a bump before? I feel like
not full speed, but like have I gone into like a training ring that had the ropes set up and obviously done that? It hurts.
Oh,
I don't think people realize like that's like reinforced steel.
Well, I think too, I've never been in a ring and I would want to take a bump just to know what it feels like, but I know that it would hurt. But I think there's things that are underrated. Like there's padding, but it's plywood 2x4s, like
this was
metal structure, and the ropes, dude. Like
I was telling my buddies at 901 Wrestling the other night. I don't know who made the decision. I don't know if it was part of the decision, but unlike WWE shows, their ring is not mic'd. Mm-hmm. But this ring, man, when you took a bump, like some guy, like I don't know who got the script, but I would have been like, if I'm sitting there working like this guy, let me get this straight. The script calls for me to literally get suplexed 7 straight times flat back. And it's just like, this thing made such a hell of a sound. It was like was like a piercing thud. And I know that doesn't make sense, but it's like, it was like, it hurt your ears, but it was a loud, like the closest thing is, remember back when they used to do the Grizzlies intros, they would do the fire, but then sometimes you'd have the night where you'd like have the pow, like, and those, it's the same thing. It's like you'd hear that and it's like it hurt your eardrums, but you're like, that was a thud more than it was like a piercing sound.
It's like there's like wrestling rings for the most part have like spring loaded, they have a little give to them. This sounds like it had zero give. It was just like landing on the ground.
What fascinated me was I took you talked about being in Mississippi. I live in North Mississippi, Jeffrey, and going towards Oxford, in Senatobia, they had this Redeemed Wrestling. I took my son, and I was telling Daniel that we met up with the guys afterward, and whether they went through a table or anything else, I literally saw the bruises and marks on these dudes' backs, and it was like, okay, there wasn't actually anything fake about that, like you might think. I was like, that dude literally got put through a table.
No, it's like, it's predetermined, but like, whatever, it's fake. First of all, I don't, Daniel, do you really feel like, I don't really feel like that gets used against us. Like in the 90s and the early 2000s, like when kayfabe was still something, that was something that would kind of get used against us. And you would always just eventually want to respond like, we know it, right? Like we don't really care. Like, that's not part of it. But what used to drive me insane is they would act like these guys weren't putting their bodies on the line. Like that all of a sudden that these guys were just like having choreographed like fight scenes for a movie. And it's like, no, these guys are laying it on the line so that my happy ass can buy a t-shirt.
Yeah, the spots and how you get to these big spots, there's some choreograph and there's some scripting, but there's nothing about off the top rope, going into the ropes, power bombing in the middle of the ring, or jumping off a cage, going through all of that is fucking real.
Mick Foley's front two teeth went through his nose.
Yeah.
Like, first off, here's the other thing. How do you fake hitting the floor? Like,
I just know I don't want to be a part of a tombstone pile driver, because when that one goes wrong, I've seen a couple of the clips. Man, your neck gets bent like that. That's a good way to have a messed up rest of your life.
There's a reason why
Stone Cold.
Yeah, I mean,
he got. I mean,
and the worst part is
arguably Stone Cold got.
Like, he can't blame Owen anymore because of what happened to Owen.
Right.
Like, you can still tell, like, even when he does interviews, like, man, he really blames Owen.
Yeah. And I mean, arguably, thankfully, like, I guess for him, he was just as good not wrestling as he was when he was wrestling. Like, I mean,
yeah, I also think it's fair to say if Owen Hart didn't hurt Stone Cold, someone else would have. Like, like in the end, like, that was just kind of his style. Like, I'm gonna do some brawling, some bruising, and like, there's a reason why stuff they can't do it anymore.
Well, Daniel's taught me that, as someone who's acclimated with all of it, that it's more really about a showmanship than it is actually being able to wrestle. So
yeah, I just I don't know. Just as a kid growing up, wrestling has always just been the thing that you watch. You get up on Saturday morning, you watch wrestling, and then, like, I remember going to my grandmother's house and there was nothing to do, but we would go to Blockbuster or the whatever, and I would rent the same 98 SummerSlam over and over and over, and I would just wrestle.
I remember hiding, like, if like the new one came out, and like I knew, like, if my mom took me to Blockbuster, my mom's rule was like no wrestling, and my dad's rule was like no wrestling that your mom knows about. And so, like, I remember, like, having to hide. Like, that's how all of us learned how to change the channel. Like, you were worried about your mom catching you watching wrestling, so, like, you flip it. You knew how to, like, set it to go back to Sports Center or ESPN, but, like, you could immediately go back to USA or go back to TNT. But, like, I remember hiding whatever new one came out so that way I could talk my dad in the next day to taking me to Blockbuster, even though they'd be like, you just went last night. It's like, Dad, I need to go to Blockbuster. Like, bad.
I mean, there's nothing better than the last channel button when WCW and
then like, but that also
WWF
prepared us for life because like that's how like eventually like when we started watching Wild On, like you could then flip back from Wild On with Brooke Burke. You could flip back to like it was
Real
like
quick.
it really set the tone for everything you'd learn in life. Like you would need that skill the rest of your life.
Well, with that, let's go ahead and play a game of this or that. Look, I'm going to tell you, speaking of games, and one of these days, I've only called once. And the day that I did call to play trivia, I'm mad that I didn't do it because it had to have been the worst day for Jeffrey. He's not big on Halloween. He's not big on Halloween. He said,
spooky. Spooky season bad.
And then Daniel, we live with some Halloween nerds, and so I would have rolled this. I was disappointed, but one of these days I'm gonna get on trivia, and I tell you, he needs some competition sometimes, Daniel, because sometimes he gets some guys that got no business calling in. I don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to answer anything. And in Jeffrey's fairness, he's really good. He knows stuff that I don't know how he knows. So I don't know. One of these days,
screening these callers. That's what we want.
No, I will say this, honest to God, I have to like if Jeff says third caller, like I had like there are legal ramifications if I don't take the third caller. Like people have gotten in serious, like guys have been fired. Like, and the thing is, like, I don't care enough. Here's what I will say. Part of the gimmick or the trick is in the end, I don't get any, I don't feel pressure. Like nothing happens. And if you're playing along at home, I would imagine 70 to 80% of people can beat me. But there's something about, man, it's like, hey, man, we can all hit a 4-footer, like with nothing around. Like we can make that putt all day. Like when we're just on a putting green, or you can hit every layup. But put a little bit of game pressure, and all of a sudden, and like that's the thing. Nobody, I play with it every week, so it just doesn't faze me. And so that is part of what helps me is that.
What's great is they get to pick which question, right, Daniel? So it falls to him all the time. And I love when somebody always picks the wrong question and he gets the easier one, and they're like, "Oh man, well, Jeffrey's like, you picked the question," like, so it just falls into his lap. It's already pre-made by Kevin.
You hang yourself, like, and then like now that's the other thing. It's like I also recognize more times than not, you're not playing me, you're playing Kevin, because Kevin can be kind of sneaky like this, where he throws out 2 categories and you think one is way more obvious. Like, oh yeah, I'll know that. Well, that's the one that's got the harder question in it. Now there's other times where he knows that you're expecting that. And so then he just makes both questions easier, both questions hard. And so like to a certain degree, you're playing Kevin as much as you're playing me.
Well, on this game of this or that, Daniel makes the rules, and the rules are you can't say neither and you can't say both. You have to answer the question, so no ducking it. Daniel, who's this or that brought to you by?
Old Dominic Distillery. Experience 150 years of tradition. Heart of downtown Memphis. It's holiday season. Holiday parties. Don't come in empty-handed. Stop by Old Dominic's. Pick up your favorite bottle. Whiskey, gin, bourbon, vodka, you name it. They got you covered. You'll be the life of the party. And trust me, when you go to Old Dominic, you won't go anywhere else for your spirits, for your good times, for your alcohol, and for just a good time.
Absolutely. All right. First one, Jeffrey. Starting off easy. Coffee or energy drink?
Coffee.
All right. Who you got this weekend? Texas or Texas A&M?
Against the spread or straight up?
Let's go straight up.
Texas.
Do you think – I got to ask an extra question to that. I'm trying to figure out is Kyle Field as hard to play at as it seems?
So I've covered 2 games there. And what amazed me both times is it is a remarkable facility, like beautiful. And like they basically just built a brand new stadium. Like they did it one side at a time, but it's beautiful. And you would think it's like very vertical. And like to me, the standard of stadiums that make a bunch of noise are usually more vertical than they are horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
But both games that I went there, man, I was like, man, I'm just like, I'll go to the grave, man. There's been nights when I was at Auburn where I was like, that damn place is so loud at night. Mm-hmm. And maybe the problem is like, hey, the games that I covered like were 2 blowouts and they just weren't that into it. But Man, it's not been on the same level as Tennessee at night for me, as LSU at night for me, even at Auburn. And I'll go to the grave. Bama gets arrogant about it, but when Bama says this is a big game and they all collectively agree on it, that place is as loud.
Well, the reason why I asked is the reason some people are giving Texas A&M a shot is that home field, but that's why I asked you: is it really as much of a home field as they're saying?
Well, this is the other thing. It's the first time. I didn't realize this until I was looking it up today. It's the first time A&M's an underdog all year.
Wow.
They were the favorite over LSU.
Well, it's a big game. They control.
Florida. I've been when I covered Florida Ole Miss 2015. That place was freaking loud.
They said the Ole Miss fans said when they were at the Swamp, these were parents of the players, and obviously they went to Death Valley at night this year. They said the Swamp was louder at least as far as this year, than it was at Death Valley, which says a lot because Ole Miss at night, and we love to hate Ole Miss. That says a lot. But I've always heard the Swamp was a hard place to play. They've never heard anybody say otherwise.
It's another one of those vertical,
which was crazy, right? They were 4-5 coming into that game, and the place didn't have an empty seat. So I mean, as much as I hate Florida, shout out their fan base for still being all in.
I think something to watch moving forward in the years to come, if we keep this like whatever the system is, teams that are kind of building something like Florida in the end, they don't have a bunch of like transfers. Like they have a young crop, and they're kind of like building for next year. They don't really have anything to lose. Like those teams have kind of played hard. Like Arkansas kind of last week against Texas, like Arkansas, like, yeah, they got beat by Ole Miss, but like Arkansas has not quit this year. And I think that's something to like kind of monitor. These teams that maybe didn't have the highest of expectations, like you kind of think like, oh, I bet they're done on their season. No, a lot of these teams are still kind of playing hard.
Yeah. All right. Better showman, speaking of, in wrestling, The Rock or Macho Man?
The Rock.
Yeah.
Really? I thought
better.
You were Macho Man's your favorite all time.
But here's the deal. Macho Man, as far as like if you go strictly on like promos, like, okay, Macho Man's got some promos out there that are top notch.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put The Rock in the ring face to face promos with another wrestler, Macho Man can't hold a candle to what he can do. And as far as wrestling and the performance, like Macho Man was great and all, but like he didn't really do a whole lot. The Rock didn't do a whole lot either, but much better athlete. I'll say this, Macho Man, I mean,
he's a pro baseball
player. So yeah. Tampa guy.
I think the other thing is it really crystallized for me. Rock during this last Mania run, and you realize, like, man, that guy still got it. Like, every promo, like, I felt like I was just eating out of his hand. Like, and it's like, man, he hadn't really done this realistically in a decade. And he just kind of came back out, and it's like, that's when you realize, like, man, there's sometimes there's just like greatness. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously something that can last a little longer because we're just talking about the talking aspect. We're not discussing like his whole, like, because he clearly was nowhere near the wrestler that he was. Right. But like, man, every promo I was like, God, I believe everything he's saying.
All right, who's gonna win? Eagles at Ravens this weekend. Who you got?
I mean, Lamar it's like Lamar versus the NFC is like an auto play. Like, I think he's like, I want to say he's like 20-1, and weirdly, the one is against Daniel Jones. And RIP Daniel. Like, you just have to say it. I will say this. I'm not as bought in on the Ravens as everybody else is.
I'm not either, and that's why, and specifically because of their defense, and that's why I'm intrigued by this game because the Eagles' offense is dialed in. Obviously, Saquon Barkley running the ball. Devontae Smith is supposed to be back, and so that's what I want to see. I want to see if the Ravens' defense can stop this Eagles' offense.
And the Eagles' defense has been playing much better, like every week. I will say this: what they did to the Rams on Sunday night was pretty damn impressive.
Mm-hmm. Me and Daniel said in the NFC, like, and I think everybody should feel this way for the most part, unless it's your team involved. Anything other than the Eagles, Lions, and the NFC Championship would be a major disappointment.
Yeah, the only way I can feel like that happens, it doesn't happen, is if somehow they meet in the divisional round.
Right.
Like if the skill, whatever, the records get off. But like I think at this point, is there even an NFC team with 3 losses?
No, I mean there isn't, and I just don't see anybody that could rise up and take the 2 spot from the Eagles.
That's what I'm saying. So like I don't know if there's any way that. No, I agree.
I mean the West and the South can be won by teams at 1 game over 500 at this point.
I mean, what would have to happen is the Lions would have to just totally like fall apart, and the Vikings would have to just win out.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair because there's only technically still what the Vikings are at 3 losses, right? Or are they at 2?
2.
No,
they're at 2, and the Packers are at 3. I guess it's conceivable the Lions could. I mean, I will say this: the Lions' injury report's starting to stack up.
Yeah, I mean that division's clearly the best in the NFC, and me and Daniel talked about it. Green Bay being an actual legit contender because the first few games you didn't know if you could buy in, but they've managed to stick around and be at the top. So
I will say for Daniel, God, I wish that the Bucs wouldn't have blown one of those 2 Falcons games because if the Falcons didn't have the full tiebreaker because they won both, I think the Bucs are kind of live.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get Mike Evans back.
I mean,
that Godwin injury really hurt them. Like, I don't think people realize how not just good he was, but beneficial to their offensive system.
I mean, they go where Baker goes. When Baker's is not.
Yeah, but Baker's kind of been a dog this year, man.
Yeah.
And like Baker's been a dog when there has not been any reason for him to be.
That's one of my favorite rants I've heard you go on historically was getting out of Cleveland and just how bad the Browns have been with Watson and how Baker's shining in Tampa.
Yeah, how you like now?
But part of it too is you go from Cleveland, you come into a place where Tom Brady was a quarterback.
Well, then you also had to go to now. Part of Baker also is he had to get the shoulder fixed. Like his shoulder was like brutal. But then he goes to Carolina, and everyone writes him off because whoever was at quarterback at Carolina their career was over. But then he literally showed up on a Southwest flight, showed up after 48 hours and won a Thursday night football game, literally learning a playbook on a Southwest flight. Like Baker, I think we're doing this too in the NFL. And I've noticed this with Caleb. When people don't like your personality, people are way too quick to write you off as a failure. And I think what we've started to see, remember, and I love Jaden Daniels too, but anyone that's watched Jaden last month goes, it's either one of 2 things. Dude's hurt or, hey, they're starting to get some film on him and he's going to have some bumps in the road. And Caleb the last month has started to play a lot better. But there's this rush of when there's something about your personality that irritates us. There's this rush to declare you like bust, done.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this: Caleb Williams' personality off the field is what bothers me. I actually like Baker on the field. That confidence and arrogance, like it's what makes me believe he's going to win. And then in regards to you bringing up Jaden and Caleb, it's funny because we're talking about personality. Bo Nix doesn't care about the spotlight, so nobody's really paying attention. He's actually should be the runaway for rookie of the year, and people don't even realize it.
No, I will say this though. They've had a lot of success beating really bad teams. Like it's the same thing. Like it's
that's when the Bears started the season off. That was the thing. Every team they had beaten had 1 or 2
one
wins.
win or 0 wins, something like that. But like, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like, hey man, everyone knows where I stand on Justin Herbert. But last night, Herbert finally had to play a guy that had a winning record. How'd it go?
Not well. All right. Who would you rather have on your team, Kobe Bryant or LeBron James?
LeBron.
Boo. All right. You may hate both these. I can't remember. When I was putting this together, I don't remember if you talked about these specifically. But which spot would you rather go to, Huey's or Central Barbecue?
Huey's. I'm not a Central guy.
I'm not either. And Huey's specifically, I'll stand firm on this as a guy who lives in South Haven. I actually think South Haven's the best location, which is crazy for a Memphis restaurant.
I don't think it's that crazy because I actually think a lot of being a good restaurant is getting better help. And so what I've always admired about Huey's is I don't care if it's really the South Haven one. I don't care if it's the Cordova one. I don't care if it's the downtown one. I don't care if it's the Millington one. I think I've been to all of them. Collierville, Germantown, all of them. You don't really get surprised at any of them. It all kind of tastes like Huey's every single time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's really difficult to do. And then my biggest problem with Central is it's pretty simple. Like, I think their sauce sucks.
I do. That's why when I asked that, I was like, he may say they're both overrated.
No, I'll ride for Huey's.
Yeah, barbecue sauce at a barbecue restaurant is pretty important.
Part of like why have I always ridden for Three Little Pigs barbecue? Why I've always ridden for Tops before riding for Tops has become overrated. But there was a time it wasn't.
I'll tell you this: a cheeseburger at Tops barbecue is the most underrated, and it's really hard to go. That's my favorite barbecue restaurant.
Well, it was underrated when you live here, Daniel. It actually gets in the voting for best burger every year.
Now it's gotten so trendy because probably like loudmouths like me that were riding for it for so long. Eventually, we got microphones, and so we really started changing the narrative. But no, I'm a big Huey's guy. My whole thing with barbecue places is, it's all smoked meat. Mm-hmm. Like we're not reinventing the wheel here. So what's it really come down to?
But when we were talking about
how do you sauce it?
But when we were talking about California earlier, Jeffrey, that's one thing. When you get out of this area, you learn to appreciate the barbecue because barbecue in some parts of the country is trash.
It's terrible. But what I will say is you also realize this is why we're unbelievably fat. This is in the end, it's very clear. It's oh yeah, they don't have good barbecue out here.
Well,
by the way, they're not.
I'll take the worst Memphis barbecue spot over the best barbecue spot in Tampa. 100%.
To Jeffrey's point, one of the worst dynamics is in this area. There's great gas station food, and there's nothing healthy about it. And
at all.
I don't know how to say no when I walk into one. And that's
if you just smell the chicken on a stick, and you're like, damn it, I guess I'm having that right now.
It's like Barlow's.
That was the thing. I sent you that picture, Daniel. It looked so run down, but I guarantee you it's got the best food.
He still got them pizza sticks in there, and they're fire.
Yeah, we went to Bolton and the gas station across the street.
Oh yeah, I played. That was a staple of when you'd play baseball at Bolton. That was your pit stop.
Yep.
Now I went over there, man. I heard that the school might be on the verge of closing down, so it looked rough.
Yeah.
He sent me pictures of the baseball field, and I know how much work I put into that field when we were there, and it looked great. And just what I saw that he sent me, I was just hurt my heart a little bit. It really did.
I realized that we graduated 22 years ago.
Do they have their own school district? Because that's kind of been a new differentiator. It's like if you don't have your own independent school, like the independent ones have all.
Well, I hear they're busing kids in from Fraser there, so whatever that means.
I wonder if they're not. Because it's not a complicated formula right now. It's like there's a clear haves and have-nots.
Yeah. All right. If only can watch one, is the Grizzlies or the Tigers?
Grizzlies.
All right. Would you prefer to be in Memphis downtown or in Midtown?
Is this to eat or is this in general?
In general, because I know Midtown takes eat.
Yeah, that's why I had to specify. I'm going downtown then. I think you got more variety.
All right, last one. Daniel's favorite question: would you rather 5 years in jail or 10 years in a coma?
Ooh. I have to say 10 years in a coma. There's a 0% chance I am surviving 5 months in jail. I would be the first guy that would get picked off so fast. And I make a horrible first impression. There's a 0% chance I could even if I was able to figure out the politics of jail and being all right, here's the side I got to be on. Here's who I got to make friends with. I wouldn't even be able to pull it off. It's I'm just going to die. At least with a coma of 10 years, I got a shot.
At 40, Jeff, I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at. And I'm not built for jail. So I know I'm not good at that. But I do know sleeping, I'm dynamite at sleeping. So I'll take a
and also,
coma all day.
think about how good you'd feel like when you woke up. You're like, let's go, let's attack the day. Like
There-
you gotta. That'd be
Jeffrey,
the first time you wake
be
up feeling good.
amazed.
Yeah.
You'd be amazed at how many. It always feels like it's baseball players. It's funny. We'll get MMA fighters, we'll get football players. They'll like give me the coma, and then you'll get these baseball cats and be like, "Give me jail." And Daniel looks at him. He's like, "You won't last in jail. You don't want jail."
Yeah, I think the people that say give me jail don't realize what the population of jail is. You have no chance.
These are the same guys that are like, yeah, I'd like to plug and promote my mom. Hi, mom. These are the same cats that are doing that on our show.
Well, it's funny because I would have thought that actually proves the point. Like I would have thought MMA people they'd be like, yeah.
No, Jaleel Willis was the best answer we ever got. He said, "I've been to jail and I'm never going back." That was awesome.
Yeah, I think it's funny because that is like, listen, y'all, that's who would know.
Yeah, and it wasn't even just about the other stuff. His second comment was the food sucks.
Well, and it's also
Fair
just,
point.
What he said? No, because he took it further. He said he didn't ship well ever the entire time he was there. So whether all sorts of different things from your behind, Daniel, I don't want nothing to do with it.
I mean, isn't that kind of the whole point of Shawshank? Is like you don't want to get comfortable in jail.
Yeah, you definitely.
Like in the end, like the guys that got comfortable in jail when they got to the outside, it's like it was night.
The other big question that we have that obviously with you not being in college, we didn't ask you, but how many of these guys will lie to Daniel's face? He'll ask them, would they rather be the first pick in the draft, or depending on the sport, sometimes they'll ask money based. It could be $5 million, it could be $10 million, or win a national championship. And they'll look at him right time and lie to him every time. I'll win a national championship. Memories last forever. And Daniel, like, you say that now.
Okay, don't you think though this matters what position you play? And here would be because I think this is the first time this is a legitimate question. Because let's be real, 10 years ago, anyone that said win a national championship, bold-faced line, like no questions asked. But now we are in this world where I think if you win a national title, particularly at a place that is a factory, it's probably worth the rest of your life, what, $20 million now? Like it's at least going to be, because by the way, if I got any eligibility left, hey y'all, you got a national championship quarterback in the portal. How y'all doing?
Yeah. But,
like, I love my school.
The easy part of the question though is he's getting the hypothetical, but as Daniel says, if I walked and dropped a duffel bag of $5 million in front of you really going to turn it down?
But see, like, see what I'm saying? Like, because now it's now become an interesting question because back when you couldn't be a free agent every day, like, yeah, like all of a sudden now I've got a decision to make. But imagine if you put a national championship winning quarterback, literally guy just wins a national title, and you put him on the open market. We just saw to tie it all together with Jim. We have a kid that's literally never taken a snap beyond high school football that just got $10 million at least. And by the way, he hasn't renegotiated. Like if he's good, what do you think the pricing? Like that's
so my theory was on that because Daniel, I hadn't even talked about this with you. So Colin Hurley, the other big time commit quarterback to LSU, starts talking about after this happens, starts talking about how much fun he's having at home, which is Florida. And everybody's like, is he going to walk too? And I was like, no, he's probably playing that game now because he knows he's
more money.
Position.
He knows what the driving rate is. He can.
I don't know how much of y'all have watched Ole Miss this year, but I have to do a post-game show for my old boss. Their backup quarterback, Austin Simmons, who was a highly rated kid, hadn't done like he's had some like mop up, like, you know, the typical they get to go play in the 4 non-con games where they all put up huge numbers and he's put up big numbers. But he came in against Georgia and they're down 7-0. And Dart has just gotten to the locker room and everybody's like freaking out because it's here Ole Miss goes again, another big game. Their quarterback gets on the first possession and throw a pick and they're all freaking out. Kid goes 6 of 7, like just throws BBs like down the field. And all I kept thinking to myself was that kid just made so much money.
And what's even more fascinating about him,
Georgia.
What's even more fascinating about him, Jeffrey, is I cover college baseball more than anything. The kid can deal from the bump too.
Well, see, that's the problem. So so it's this weird thing that I've never understood, because when my elbow hurt throwing a baseball, my elbow hurt throwing the football too. But there's now this weird thing where it's like Brock Purdy went through the same thing. Brock Purdy, if you were a baseball player, he would need Tommy John, but he doesn't need it to throw a football. And it's never made sense to me. But that's the thing. So it kind of works out to make Austin even more valuable to a football team, because Austin can't basically play baseball this year. And dude was coming in as a true freshman, and he's by the way, he reclassified. So the kid was young. Kid was absolutely dealing from the left-hand side as a true freshman in SEC ball on a bad baseball team. He was a bright spot for them. Mm-hmm. But now it's like, because he needs the elbow surgery to pitch, it's like, all right, well, he's even more valuable because now he has to be football only.
I'm with you. I don't understand how throwing a football can be done if you need Tommy John, but I just feel like throwing a football is more elbow driven than throwing a baseball. At least
the only thing you could talk me into, because I was always a catcher, so I never was a big but my brother, who needed Tommy John twice, my brother threw a slider before it was cool to throw a slider, before literally everyone was just throw it as hard as you can and throw a slider. And so what you could talk me into is, because everybody has to throw sliders now, that you can't get the actual tension. You don't have the ligament, so you can't actually spin it. But I guess also the other thing is you can't. I mean, what's the most you can throw a football? I don't know. Guys with huge arms throw a football 50 miles an hour. I wonder if there's in the end, it's because you're throwing something that heavy, you can't throw it. You can't.
Dan, you got a science assignment this week.
Yeah, I mean,
it's never made any sense.
I think a lot of it is too, with a baseball, you can roll over the top of it. You can't necessarily do that with a football. You can to some degree, but not with the torque and the
thing that never made sense to me is everyone always remembers the day throwing a football. There's nothing cooler than figuring out how to throw the deep ball that would turn over.
Yeah.
And you finally figured out, it's if I spin it just enough and really flick it hard down. But I think maybe that's it, because you're going, in the end, the arm is technically always doing the same motion. You're going down. Whereas if you're really trying to throw a breaking ball, you're coming across.
Daniel, yeah, we got to do some investigative work, because Daniel was a college baseball pitcher and coach, so very familiar with the arm injuries.
I mean, remember that segment?
Yeah, those are awesome. What I will say is we've used, and if people are saying, and this is a trend these days, but this isn't a new thing. We've used footballs to warm up for baseball.
Oh, that's how everybody learned
for a long time. Yeah, for a long time.
Hey, it's funny you bring that up, Daniel, because it drives me nuts with them showing the Paul Skeens. And hey, two-time guest, we love Skeens, but showing he's got this cool warm-up routine with football, as if every other dude we had on the show had done the same thing.
That's not some of the stuff that he does is new and revolutionary, but that ain't one of them. It's not.
I don't know if any of y'all have coached football, but I've got a new tell. So I'm noticing this new horrible trend in youth football, the quarterback guru. If I see kids warming up and they do something like this, I'm out on every single kid. I've never seen a kid do some version of that warm up, and that kid impressed me. It's all from this new age, it was oh, you got to learn how to throw off platform. What do you mean, arm angles? What are you trying to say? Stop being a bullshit artist. What are you trying to say?
My question would be, if you're doing that with both arms and you're warm, why?
So I start, because my high school coach retired this year, and he was up in the press box one game, and I was working this theory on. I was like, Coach, why did you never teach me? Why did you never teach me to go in warm-ups like this? He's like, well, that's a sore subject, because you can tell what is clearly happening now is these quarterback gurus are teaching wildly different things than what the offense demands or asks for, and there's clearly a lot of tension, and it doesn't surprise me that you're seeing a lot of high school kids on their 4th high school in 4 years, particularly quarterbacks.
Yeah, and they all got a quarterback coach
Yep.
that's teaching them whatever the hell they
Oh,
want.
and they're all going to be Mahomes. I
Yeah.
tell you what, man. That's by the way, I don't know, y'all. How many Mahomeses have you seen since Mahomes? I'm counting them all right now.
Exactly. All right, Jeffrey. Anything you want to plug or promote before you get out of here, man?
No, this was a blast, guys.
Yeah, I appreciate you having you, man. Obviously, 92.9 every afternoon, 2 Central, 3 on the East for me. I'm tuning in every day. What's the schedule for the rest of the week? I know it's holidays.
So we'll be live tomorrow, and then we are off Thursday, Friday, back at it Monday, and then we're going Monday through Christmas. Like, we'll do a show on Christmas Eve. So my first day off will be.
Well, what I tell people, Jeffrey, because it's crazy, right? Because me and Daniel, we asked people, do they listen to podcasts? And people ask me, do I listen to sports podcasts? And I'm like, no, I listen to sports radio. And they're like, really? You're, a podcast guy? I'm like, but I live in an area where we got good shows all day, and not everybody can say that. And so it's one of those things I realized I'm blessed. Like, I get to listen to sports radio all day. And so I don't really feel the need for podcasts. It's not because I don't like podcasts. So I love that I'm in the Memphis area and can listen to ESPN. It's definitely good.
Well, I appreciate that. So I hope that I'm a small part of that. But most importantly, I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving. So it's my favorite holiday.
Let's go.
3 things I love the most: eating, football, and sleeping. So it's a holiday that doesn't insist upon itself. You don't have to buy any presents. You don't have to, you know what I mean? All it asks is you show up and you want to watch a little football.
Yeah. And if you bring a side dish.
Yeah. That you're welcome. Like, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Same to you, Jeffrey, man. Enjoy the holiday. We'll see you hopefully soon. We'll talk. We'll catch up again. Yeah. Appreciate it. That's Jeffrey Wright, everybody. If you like hearing Jeffrey's story, or you just like hearing us average Joes talk X's and O's, please like and share the podcast on Facebook, retweet us on X, listen and subscribe wherever you stream your podcasts. Always go over to YouTube, click like, click subscribe, click the notifications. That way you're notified every time we upload new content, and you can be the first one to hit it up. Jim, another solid week. Happy Thanksgiving to you and the fam. Happy Thanksgiving to all the fans out there, and we'll be back next week. Another solid week. What are we looking at, Jim? Who we got?
You know what it is. We're finally there. LSU baseball, and then LSU baseball.
There it is. LSU baseball on deck. I know y'all been asking for it, so next week it's coming at you hot and heavy. This has been the Off the Bench podcast. As always, remember, strong body, sharp minds, grit and grind all the time. We are out.